Unusual is rarely bad. It's simply unusual. Something shifted in Jon's chest. Almost a smile. He didn't quite return it. But he was closer than he'd been in a long time. Jon. The invitation came at the end of his 6th week in the fortress. The honored guest is invited to dine with General Kai's household, at the hour of the rooster. Jon stared at the paper for a long time, as if the characters might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. A formal meal. With the general. In public. Where people could see him and judge him and decide he didn't belong. He was still staring when Mei Ling appeared at his door, knocking first as she always did now. Stop panicking. I'm not. I can hear you panicking from across the fortress. You can't hear. Your face is doing that thing. The scared thing. I don't have a scared thing. You absolutely do. Your eyes go all wide and your mouth gets tight and you look like a rabbit that's seen a hawk. She crossed her arms, looking disturbingly like her father in that moment. Come on. I'll sit next to you. If you do something wrong, I'll kick you under the table. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. Now let me help you with your clothes. You can't meet my father looking like you slept in a haystack. The dining room was smaller than Jon expected. Elegant, yes, carved wooden panels, silk hangings, a low table set with porcelain dishes that probably cost more than everything Jon had ever owned combined. But smaller. More intimate. Just 4 places set around the table, General Kai at the head, Master Ji to his right, Mei Ling and Jon across from each other. Jon felt exposed. Every inch of his skin prickled with the certainty that he was being watched, judged, found wanting. His hands wanted to shake, and he held them very still in his lap, focusing on his breathing. In hold. Out. Steady. General Kai was a weathered man of perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen things Jon could only imagine. He moved with the economy of a soldier, spoke with the directness of a commander. But there was something else in his face when he looked at his daughter, a softness that didn't quite fit with the rest of him. You've recovered well, Kai said to Jon. His voice was neutral, neither warm nor cold. Master Ji tells me you're an unusual student. Master Ji is a good teacher. That's not what I asked. Jon swallowed. I try to learn what I'm taught. Kai studied him for a long moment, and Jon had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed not as a threat, not quite, but as a puzzle that needed solving. Then Kai nodded, apparently satisfied with whatever he'd seen, and turned to his food. The meal proceeded. Dumplings came first, then rice, then vegetables and sauces Jon had never tasted. He ate carefully, watching Mei Ling for cues on which utensils to use and how to hold them. She caught his eye occasionally, offering small smiles of encouragement. Once, when he reached for the wrong dish, she nudged his elbow almost imperceptibly, redirecting him. She'd promised to kick him under the table, but the reality was gentler. Just small corrections, offered without judgment or attention. She's good at this, Jon realized. Taking care of people without making them feel small. Ji shared a story about a foolish student he'd had years ago, one who'd been so eager to prove his intelligence that he'd quoted a text incorrectly and then argued with the correction for an hour. Mei Ling laughed, and even Kai's mouth twitched with something that might have been amusement. Jon watched them interact, father and daughter and teacher, bound by years of shared history, of meals eaten together and stories told and ordinary days lived in ordinary rhythm. They knew each other's rhythms, anticipated each other's responses. They were a family in ways Jon had never quite been part of a family, even in Winterfell. And somehow, impossibly, they'd made a space for him at their table. Halfway through the meal, Jon realized his hands had stopped wanting to shake. No one was watching him for mistakes. No one was waiting to punish him. They were just eating, just talking, just being. This is real, he thought. They're not going to hurt you. This is real. The emotion hit him without warning, a wave of something so vast and unexpected that he had to excuse himself, murmuring an apology, and flee to the washroom. He splashed water on his face, stared at his reflection in the bronze mirror, white hair, grey eyes, face that was still too thin but no longer starving. A boy he barely recognized. "You're safe," he told that boy. "You're safe, and they're kind, and this is real." The boy in the mirror didn't quite believe him. But that was all right. Jon barely believed himself. When he returned to the dining room, Mei Ling had saved him a sweet rice cake. "The best part of the meal," she whispered, sliding it across the table. "I had to fight Cook Lian for extra." Jon took a bite. The sweetness burst across his tongue, honey and rice and something floral he couldn't identify. "It's delicious." He said it quietly, but Mei Ling beamed as if he'd recited poetry. And Jon realized, with a start, that he meant it. Not just the food, though the food was good, but all of it. The meal. The company. The warmth of being welcomed instead of merely tolerated. "Thank you," he added. "For everything." Mei Ling's smile softened into something more serious. "You're welcome. For everything." Walking back to his room, Jon allowed himself to think the thought he'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe I could belong here. It was the most dangerous thought he'd had in years. Belonging meant trusting. Trusting meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant pain when everything fell apart. But it was also the most hopeful thought he'd had in years. And hope, he was learning, was harder to kill than he'd imagined. He thought of Robb, back in Winterfell, who'd called him brother even when the word was forbidden. He thought of Dalla on the Mermaid's Grace, who'd fed him when she could have turned him in. He thought of Taganaro in Braavos, who'd taught him that family wasn't always blood. Maybe kindness wasn't as rare as he'd believed. Maybe there were places in the world where broken things could be mended, where lost things could be found. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found one. Jon reached his room, closed the door behind him, and stood in the darkness for a long moment. Then, for the first time he could remember, he smiled. It was small and uncertain, and it faded quickly. But it was there. That was something. That was enough. Chapter 8, The Broken Mirror Part 1. Jon. The world was grey and still when Jon slipped from his room. Mist curled between the stable buildings like smoke from a dying fire, thick enough to muffle his footsteps on the packed earth. The fortress slept around him, guards on the walls seeing nothing but fog, servants still in their beds, and even the horses drowsing in their stalls. The sun had not yet crested the mountains, and the air held that particular coolness of pre-dawn, the kind that made your breath fog and your skin prickle. Jon moved through it like a ghost, carrying his secrets bundled in cloth. The space behind the stables had become his sanctuary these past 6 weeks. A stretch of hard-packed earth between the rear wall and a crumbling section of the old fortress that no one used anymore. Hidden from casual view, forgotten by the servants, and too far from the main buildings for anyone to stumble upon by accident. Here, in the grey hours before the world woke, Jon had been building something. He unwrapped the cloth with careful hands. 2 wooden swords emerged, practice blades he'd carved himself from fallen branches, sanded smooth with stolen pumice, and balanced as well as he could manage. They were shorter than standard practice swords, sized for his still-growing frame, and light enough that he could wield them for an hour without his arms giving out. 6 weeks, Jon thought, settling into his opening stance. 6 weeks of practice. 3 form sequences. The beginning of something real. He moved. The forms were his own invention, cobbled together from what Master Ji had taught him, what he'd observed of the fortress soldiers, and what Marcus's memories whispered about combat theory. Attack patterns that flowed into defensive transitions, one blade covering while the other struck, and the complex footwork required to maintain balance while wielding 2 weapons instead of 1. He wasn't using the breathing techniques. Not yet. This exercise was about muscle memory, about teaching his body to move in ways that didn't come naturally. The human form was designed for one weapon and a shield. Two swords required rewiring everything: how you stood, how you pivoted, and how you thought about the space around you. The wooden blades cut patterns through the mist. The left sword swept low while the right sword guarded high. The right sword thrust while the left sword deflected an imaginary counter. The two swords moved together in harmony, then clashed against each other, and finally returned to moving in harmony again. This is what healing feels like, Jon thought as he flowed between forms. Not just surviving. Becoming. His hands worked now. The right one still ached in cold weather, the grip was not as strong as it should be, and the fingers were occasionally stiff in the mornings. But they worked. Master Ji had rebuilt what Grazdan's guards had broken, and Jon had spent months learning to trust them again. He paused between sequences, catching his breath. The twin swords rested in his hands, one blade angled up, one angled down. The familiar weight of them, the way they balanced against each other. The memory came unbidden. Winterfell. It had been 4 years since then, although at times it felt like 4 lifetimes. A feast night. Jon sat with the other children in the spacious hall's corner, as far from the high table as Lady Catelyn's seating arrangements could manage. The adults drank and laughed and forgot that children existed, which suited Jon fine. It meant old Nan could gather them for stories without being shooed away to bed. "Tell us about nights," Arya had demanded. She was barely 3 but already fierce, already unwilling to sit still for tales of maidens and flowers. Jon remembered her sitting on his lap, squirming with impatience, her small hands grabbing at his tunic. "Nights, is it?" Old Nan's voice crackled like old parchment. Her eyes were milky with age, but they saw things that younger eyes missed. "Then I'll tell you of the greatest knight who ever lived. Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning." The children leaned in. Even Sansa, who usually only wanted stories about princes and maidens and songs, went quiet. "He carried 2 swords into battle, little lords and ladies. Dawn in one hand, a blade forged from a fallen star, pale as milk and sharper than winter. And another sword in his off-hand, for Arthur Dayne was so skilled he needed no shield. He'd killed the smiling knight in single combat, defeated the greatest warriors of his age, and served 3 kings with honor unblemished." "Did anyone ever beat him?" Robb asked, his eyes wide. Old Nan's gaze found Jon just for a moment, a flicker of something strange. He'd never understood what that look meant. "Your father did, young lord." This event took place at a tower in the mountains of Dorne, following the conclusion of Robert's rebellion. Lord Stark and his companions faced Arthur Dayne and 2 other knights of the King's Guard. 3 against 7, the legends say. And when the fighting was done, only 2 men walked away. "Father killed the greatest knight ever." Robb sounded odd. "Proud." "They killed each other, in a manner of speaking. Arthur Dayne fell, and most of Lord Stark's companions with him. They say your father wept when it was done. He'd killed the finest knight in all the 7 kingdoms, and it broke something in him." Later that night, when the feast had ended and the other children had been taken to bed, Jon had slipped away to the God's Wood. Beneath the heart tree, he discovered a sturdy, straight stick. He'd held it like a sword, the way Sir Roderick was teaching them. Then he'd found another stick. Held both. He envisioned himself assuming the role of Arthur Dayne. 2 swords against the world. Unbeatable. Worthy. A knight so skilled that even Lord Eddard Stark had wept to kill him. That was the first time Jon had dreamed of 2 swords. Jon shook off the memory. The mist was beginning to thin, the grey lightened toward silver as dawn approached. He wasn't in Winterfell anymore. He was in Uti, half a world away, in a fortress where no one called him bastard and a girl had decided he was worth saving. But the dream had stayed with him. Through everything, slavery, storms, survival, the image of Arthur Dayne had remained. A goal. A possibility. Something to become instead of just something to endure. If I can fight like him, Jon thought, settling back into stance, then I'm not just a survivor. I'm something more. He decided to try one technique. Just one, carefully controlled. He reached for water, breathing the calmest, most controlled of the forms Marcus had left him. Let it settle into his body like cool water filling a vessel. Then he moved through a dual blade sequence at enhanced speed. For a moment, it worked. The swords blurred slightly, his movements smoothing into something faster and more fluid than mere muscle could achieve. The forms flowed into each other like water over stones, his feet barely touching the earth. His right hand cramped. Not gradually, savagely. The fingers that had been broken in Grazdan's compound, rebuilt by Master Ji, were still not fully healed. They ceased mid-motion, locking into a claw. The right sword flew from his grip, clattering against the stable wall. Jon staggered, the form collapsing, his breathing technique shattering as pain shot up his arm. He stood there for a moment, gasping. Then he retrieved the sword, flexing his fingers, forcing them to work. The knuckles ached. The joints protested. But they moved, eventually. It's early, he told himself. I'm still healing. This is just rust. It will get better. He checked the angle of the sun. Grey had given way to pale gold at the mountain peaks. Time to stop. Mei Ling would be waking soon, and he'd promised to show her today. Finally, after weeks of her asking. As he wrapped the practice swords in their cloth, Jon noticed his ribs aching. The old breaks, the ones from the Jade Serpent and before, protested the rotational movement that dual wielding required. He pressed a hand against his side and felt the familiar tenderness. He ignored it. He'd ignored worse. Today was the day. He was finally ready. Or so he believed. Jon. The garden was green now, deep summer green. The cherry blossoms had long since fallen and were replaced by leaves that cast dappled shadows across the worn wooden bench. Mei Ling had arranged breakfast on the space between them, sweet buns glazed with honey, fruit he still couldn't name after months of trying, and tea steaming gently in small cups. This had become their ritual, morning meals in the garden before the day's duties claimed them, an hour of peace in a world that was rarely peaceful. She was practically vibrating with excitement. Today. She leaned forward, eyes bright. You'll really show me today? I said I would. You've been saying that for weeks. Every time I ask, you say soon. Soon never comes. Today, it comes. She studied him, her eyes narrowing with playful suspicion. At 11 now, Mei Ling had grown into her features, the baby roundness giving way to something sharper, more defined. She looked more like her father every month, though she'd probably hit Jon if he told her that. What changed? Why today? Jon picked up a sweet bun, buying time. He wanted to tell her about the twin swords. About Arthur Dane. About the dream he'd been nurturing in secret, building piece by piece in the grey hours before dawn. But he wanted her to see it more than hear about it. Let her be surprised. Let her see what he could become. I've been practicing something, he said carefully. Something new. I want you to see it when it's ready. Is it ready? He thought about the cramp in his hand this morning. He felt a sharp pain in his ribs. Pushed the doubt aside. Ready enough. Mei Ling opened her mouth to press further, then closed it. She'd learned, over the months, when to push and when to wait. This was a waiting moment. I should tell you something, she said instead, suddenly not meeting his eyes. I invited Sun Cao. Jon's hand paused halfway to his tea. Why? Because he's been asking about you. About what you can do. The rumors about the duel last month when you disarmed Chen Wei with that counter nobody saw coming, they've spread. He wants to see for himself. I didn't invite him to see. I know. But... She hesitated, drawing patterns on the bench with her finger. He's been different lately. Since your fight in the courtyard, you kept getting up. I think he respects you. He just doesn't know how to show it. Jon considered. Watching Sun Cao meant more pressure. More eyes. More judgment. The cold part of him that calculated odds and escape routes warned that more witnesses meant more risk. But another part, the part that remembered Arthur Dayne, that dreamed of being worthy, whispered that more people seeing what he could become was precisely what he wanted. Pride won over caution. Fine. He can watch. Mei Ling beamed, relief and excitement mixing in her expression. You won't regret it. This will be wonderful. I hope so, Jon thought. But he kept the doubt off his face. They finished breakfast as the sun climbed higher. The training yard awaited Jon. The training yard was empty when they arrived. Mei Ling had arranged it, pulled whatever strings the general's daughter could pull to ensure this hour would be theirs alone. The sand gleamed pale gold in the late morning light. Wooden practice dummies lined one wall, their surfaces scarred from 1,000 strikes. Weapon racks waited nearby, bristling with practice blades of every size. Jon carried his hidden swords wrapped in cloth, held against his chest like sacred relics. His heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. Mei Ling settled on a low wall at the yard's edge, legs swinging, practically bouncing with anticipation. Sun Cao stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. He'd grown in the months since their duel, taller, broader in the shoulders, but his eyes held the same guarded watchfulness they always had. A few servants had found reasons to be nearby. Sweeping sand that didn't need sweeping. Carrying water to barrels that were already full. Word had spread, despite Mei Ling's attempts at privacy. The foreign boy was doing something unusual in the training yard. Of course people wanted to watch. Jon walked to the center of the yard. The sand shifted under his feet, familiar and strange at once. He'd trained here before, with Master Ji's exercises and Sun Cao's reluctant corrections. But never like this. Never with so much riding on the outcome. He unwrapped the cloth. The twin practice swords emerged, their wooden surfaces smooth from weeks of handling. Mei Ling's eyes went wide. 2 swords? Jon, you've been training with 2. Jon felt a flush of pride he couldn't entirely suppress. For a few weeks. Dual wielding. Sun Cao's voice cut across the yard, skeptical. That's a fool's art. Every sword master knows this. You sacrifice power for flash. 1 strong blade beats 2 weak ones every time. Jon met his eyes. The old rivalry hadn't vanished entirely, it had just evolved. It had evolved into something more complex than mere hostility. Only if you're not fast enough. The challenge hung in the air. Sun Cao's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Tell us, Mei Ling said, leaning forward. Why 2 swords? Jon settled into his opening stance, 1 blade high and 1 low. There was a knight in Westeros. The greatest who ever lived. They called him the Sword of the Morning. He could feel Sun Cao's attention sharpen. Even skeptical, the older boy was listening. He fought with 2 blades. Not for show, because he was so skilled he didn't need a shield. No one could stand against him. They say he killed the Smiling Knight, the greatest outlaw of his age. They say he could have been king if he'd wanted, but he chose honor instead. What happened to him? Mei Ling asked. My father killed him. At the end of a war. They say father wept when it was done. He'd killed the finest knight in all the 7 kingdoms, and it broke something in him. Silence. Even the servants had stopped pretending to work. Show us, Mei Ling said softly. Jon began to move. He started slow. No breathing techniques, no enhancement, just the forms he'd practiced for 6 weeks, the muscle memory he'd painstakingly built. Basic attack patterns flowed into defensive transitions, 1 blade sweeping while the other guarded, his feet tracing patterns in the sand that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them. He was competent. 6 weeks of secret practice had built something real, something that worked. The swords moved in his hands like extensions of his body, their weight familiar, their balance true. Mei Ling watched with growing delight. She'd known he was training at something, known he was working toward a surprise. But seeing the weeks of hidden effort made manifest brought a smile to her face that Jon felt like warmth in his chest. Sun Cao remained unimpressed. Or at least, his face remained unimpressed. His eyes tracked Jon's movement with an intensity that belied his crossed arms and neutral expression. "Any soldier can wave 2 sticks around," he said when Jon paused between sequences. "This proves nothing. Show him the real thing, Jon." Mei Ling's voice was eager. "The fast thing." Jon hesitated. He hadn't used the breathing techniques at full power since the storm occurred. Since he had drowned in the Jade Sea, his memories became tangled with the techniques, making it so that using one would trigger the other. Every time he'd tried, the flashbacks had come: chains and fire and Alia dying on the cross. But he'd been healing. He'd made progress in the garden, those moments of meditation where the calm came without the memories. And Mei Ling was watching with such faith and certainty that he could do this. And Sun Cao's dismissive expression needed wiping away. Just once, Jon told himself. "I wanted to demonstrate this to them. I've been healing. Practicing. I'm stronger now. They need to see what I can become." He settled into a stance. Raised both swords. Found his center. "Watch carefully." Jon reached for thunder breathing. The technique flooded through him like lightning given liquid form, not the explosive burst of combat, but a sustained flow of power that enhanced every movement, every nerve, every fiber of muscle. He layered water breathing underneath, adding fluidity to the force. Let beast breathing sharpen his awareness of the space around him, the location of every body in the yard, every practice dummy, and every grain of sand. Everything was his. Everything Marcus had given him. Channeled through 2 swords, the way Arthur Dayne had channeled his skill through Dawn and its companion blade. He moved. For 3 seconds, it was perfect. Jon flowed through the dual sword forms at a speed that should have been impossible. The wooden blades became silver blurs, cutting patterns in the air that seemed to hang like afterimages. His feet barely touched the sand. His body pivoted and spun between strikes like water, like wind, like something that had never been fully human. The servants gasped. One dropped a bucket, the clatter impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Sun Cao's arms uncrossed. His carefully maintained neutrality shattered, replaced by something Jon had never seen on his face before: genuine shock. His eyes went wide, tracking movements he couldn't possibly follow. Mei Ling laughed, that pure, unself-conscious sound that Jon had learned to treasure. Joy has given voice. This moment was filled with pride, delight, and a sense of vindication for Jon's faith. Inside himself, Jon felt it, power flooding through him, the old strength Marcus had left him, flowing like a river after spring thaw. His body sang with the technique. Every movement felt like flight. For 3 seconds, he wasn't Jon Snow, a bastard of Winterfell, a branded slave, and a broken boy. He was Arthur Dayne. He was the sword of the morning reborn. 3 seconds. Then his right hand cramped. Not gradually, savagely. The fingers that had been broken in Grazdan's compound, rebuilt by Master Ji, were still healing despite months of patience and care. They seized mid-strike, locking into a claw of agony. The right sword flew from his grip, spinning away across the sand. Jon's body tried to compensate. His torso twisted to cover the lost blade with the remaining one, and his ribs screamed in protest. The old fractures from the storm, from before, from a lifetime of damage his young body had never properly healed, cracked again under the rotational stress. He stumbled. Dropped the second sword. The breathing technique shattered like glass, the power bleeding away and leaving only pain. And then the memories came. Not Yunkai this time. He did not remember the slave pits, the brand, or the guards who had broken his fingers. Winterfell. The training yard, 4 years ago. Theon's practice sword shattered under his strike, splinters flying. The older boy was on the ground, Jon's blade at his throat, his own hand shaking with power he didn't understand. Lady Catelyn's face on the gallery above, fear and hatred and something like horror. Sir Roderick's voice, careful and frightened, "Boy, what are you?" The moment everything had changed. The moment he'd become a monster in their eyes. Jon went to his knees. He was gasping, shaking, and unable to tell past from present. The training yard spun around him, but was it this training yard or that one? Was the sand beneath his palms warm from Yeti's summer sun or cold from Winterfell's eternal chill? He could hear voices, but they were wrong. They were speaking Yetish, not common tongue. Where was he? When was he? Monster, Lady Catelyn's voice whispered through time and distance. I always knew there was something wrong with you. Mei Ling. She was off the wall before she realized she was moving. Jon. Jon. He was on his knees in the sand, hands pressed flat against the ground, shaking like a leaf in a typhoon. His white hair had fallen across his face, hiding his expression, but she could see his shoulders heaving with breaths that came too fast, too shallow. His eyes were open. But they weren't seeing her. They were seeing something else, somewhere else, a place she couldn't reach, a memory she couldn't fight. She'd seen such scenes before. In the early days, when he'd first arrived. The moments when he'd go away inside himself, when the present dissolved and the past swallowed him whole. She'd learned to talk him back, to anchor him with her voice and her presence. She'd thought those moments were over. He'd been so much better lately. He'd been healing. Jon, it's me. She knelt beside him, not touching. She'd learned that touching during these episodes sometimes made them worse. It's Mei Ling. You're here. You're in Yeti. You're in the training yard. You're safe. His breathing didn't slow. His hands clawed at the sand like he was trying to hold onto something that kept slipping away. The sky is blue, she said, pulling words from somewhere, anything to anchor him. The sun is warm. There are birds singing in the trees by the wall. I'm here. I'm right here. You're not alone. Sun Cao. Sun Cao stood frozen. He'd expected many things from this demonstration. A foreign technique, perhaps impressive but ultimately impractical. Alternatively, it could have been a failure, revealing the barbarian's tricks as nothing special and serving as further evidence that the foreigner did not belong here. He hadn't expected this. The boy had moved like nothing Sun Cao had ever seen. Not just fast, impossible. For 3 seconds, Jon had been beyond human, beyond anything Sun Cao had trained his entire life to become. A lifetime of practice, of perfect forms and disciplined effort, and Sun Cao knew with cold certainty that he'd never move like that. Would never even come close. And then Jon had shattered like a clay pot dropped on stone. The impossible grace had become a graceless collapse. The power had become pain. Whatever Jon was, whatever gift or curse made him capable of that movement, it had broken him in the trying. The servants were whispering. Sun Cao caught fragments. Cursed, I told you. White devil. Shouldn't be here. The sea should have kept him. Anger flared in Sun Cao's chest, surprising in its intensity. Silence. The servants looked at him, startled by the steel in his voice. He's a guest of General Kai's household. Any of you who spread rumors about what you saw here will answer to me. Is that understood? They bowed, scattered, and melted away from the yard like morning mist. Sun Cao watched them go, not entirely sure why he'd done that. He didn't even like the foreign boy. Not really. The old resentment was still there, buried but not gone, resentment that Mei Ling had chosen Jon's company over his, that General Kai had made room in his household for a stranger when Sun Cao had spent 4 years trying to earn a fraction of that acceptance. But whatever Jon was, he didn't deserve whispers and curses from servants who'd never held a sword. They had never attempted to achieve anything and had instead broken against their own limitations. Sun Cao knew something about that. More than he'd ever admit. "Get Master Ji." His voice sounded strange in his ears. "Now." One of the remaining servants ran. "Jon." Mei Ling's voice reached him through the fog. "Yi. I'm in Yi. The garden. The fortress." Mei Ling. He forced his eyes to focus. He saw her face, which was both terrified and determined, just inches from his own. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her face like a curtain. Her hands hovered near him, not quite touching, wanting to help but not knowing how. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." Her voice was steady, steadier than he deserved. "Just breathe. Regular breathing. This isn't about the technique. Just breathe." He tried. His ribs protested, the cracked bones sending spikes of pain through his chest. His right hand wouldn't stop shaking the fingers that had betrayed him, that had shattered his dream in the moment of its flowering. He'd wanted to show them Arthur Dane. Instead, he'd shown them what he really was. Broken. Sun Cao. Master Ji arrived faster than Sun Cao had expected, his medicine bag clutched in one gnarled hand. The old scholar took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Jon on his knees, Mei Ling beside him, the dropped swords, the scattered sand, and his expression revealed nothing. But his eyes were calculating. Sun Cao had learned to watch Ji's eyes. They were never as calm as his face. "Bring him to my study," Ji said. "Carefully. Don't force him to walk if he can't." Mei Ling looked up. "He was showing us the breathing technique and then I saw enough." Ji's voice was calm, but something in it made Sun Cao stand straighter. "Help him up. Sun Cao, collect those swords." Sun Cao moved to obey. He picked up the twin practice blades from where they'd fallen, one near the wall, one still close to Jon's trembling hand. They were lighter than he expected. Well balanced. Clearly crafted by someone who understood how swords were supposed to feel. 2 swords, he thought. He thought of Jon trying to become like some Westerosi legend. Fool! But there was no contempt in the thought. There was only a sense of understanding. Jon rose with Mei Ling's help. His legs shook. His face was pale as milk, paler than his hair, all the color drained by pain and memory. He saw the twin swords in Sun Cao's hands. Something flickered in his grey eyes: shame, loss, grief. This was the same expression that Sun Cao had seen in the mirror years ago, when he finally understood that his father was never coming home. "I'm sorry," Jon said again. "To no one. To everyone." He let Mei Ling lead him away, one careful step at a time. Sun Cao stood in the emptying training yard, holding 2 wooden swords, and wondered what he'd just witnessed. A failure, certainly. But it's also something else. For 3 seconds, he'd seen something beyond human, something that existed in legends and stories and nowhere else. And then he'd seen it break. "What are you?" Sun Cao thought, watching Jon's white hair disappear through the gate. "What happened to make you this way?" He didn't have answers. But for the first time since the foreign boy had arrived, Sun Cao found himself wanting them. Chapter 9, The Broken Mirror Part 2. Jon. Master Ji's study smelled of ink and herbs, familiar scents that should have been comforting. They weren't. Jon sat on the low examination bench, stripped to the waist, staring at a point on the wall where 2 scrolls hung slightly crooked. He focused on that imperfection because focusing on anything else, Mei Ling's worried face in the corner, Ji's methodical movements, his trembling hands, was unbearable. The shaking had mostly stopped. Mostly. His right hand still trembled intermittently, the fingers that had betrayed him twitching like dying insects. His ribs ached with every breath, a deep bone-level pain that he recognized from the storm, from Yunkai, and from all the times his body had been broken and put back together wrong. I wanted to show them Arthur Dane. I showed them a broken thing. Cursed white devil. The servants were right. There's something wrong with me. Raise your arms, Ji said. Slowly. Jon obeyed. His ribs screamed in protest, the muscles along his sides spasming as he lifted. He got his arms perhaps 2/3 of the way up before the pain became a wall he couldn't push through. Ji noted the development without comment. His face revealed nothing, the same scholarly neutrality he brought to translating ancient texts or discussing military history. But over these months, Jon had learned to interpret the old man's subtle cues. The slight tightening around his eyes. The almost imperceptible shake of his head. It wasn't positive news. Make a fist. Both hands. The left hand cooperated, his fingers curling smoothly into his palm. The right trembled, the digits moving unevenly, the grip weak and uncertain. Jon stared at his hand like it belonged to someone else. Breathe deeply. As deep as you can. Jon tried. His lungs expanded, filling with air and then hit a wall. The scar tissue and damaged lung capacity were the legacy of seawater exposure and drowning. He coughed, the spasm sending fresh pain through his ribs. Ji continued his examination in silence. His fingers probed Jon's ribcage, pressing gently at points that made Jon hiss through his teeth. He manipulated Jon's right hand, testing each joint, each finger, his expression growing more grave with every movement. Finally, he stepped back. He washed his hands in a basin on his desk. He took his time drying them, choosing words. Your techniques are extraordinary, Ji said at last. In all my years, I have seen nothing quite like them. The speed, the power, the enhancement of the body's natural capabilities remarkable. Jon waited. There was always a but. But your body cannot contain what you're asking it to do. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into silence. Ji picked up a ceramic cup from his desk, a simple thing, pale blue glaze, the kind used for everyday tea. He held it up to the light. Imagine this cup is your body. Your breathing techniques are like pouring boiling water into it. A strong cup can hold boiling water without breaking. He tilted the cup slightly, and Jon saw what he hadn't noticed before, a hairline fracture running down one side, barely visible. But a cup with cracks. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Your fingers, Ji continued, setting the cup down, were broken and healed wrong. I repaired them as best I could, but the bone itself is weakened. Every time you grip a sword with full force, you stress fractures that never fully mended. Jon looked at his right hand. The fingers that had failed him. The fingers that Grazdan's guards had broken one by one while they laughed. Your ribs have been broken at least 3 times that I can identify. Possibly more. They're held together by scar tissue and hope. The rotational force required for your techniques, especially with 2 swords, puts extraordinary stress on the ribcage. You're recracking them every time you push too hard. 3 times. Jon tried to remember. The storm, certainly. The beating in Yunkai when he'd tried to escape. And before that, had he broken ribs in Braavos? In Volantis? The injuries blurred together, a catalogue of damage he'd stopped counting long ago. And your lungs? Ji paused. Something in his expression shifted, not pity, exactly, but something close to it. The seawater damage from the shipwreck. Scar tissue in the lung lining. Your breathing capacity is perhaps 70% of what it should be. For normal activity, the condition is manageable. For techniques that require deep, powerful breathing. I'm crippled. The word came out flat. Dead. Jon hadn't meant to say it, but there it was, hanging in the air between them. You're damaged, Ji corrected. There's a difference. From the corner, Mei Ling's voice cut through the silence, there has to be something. Medicine. Treatment. Something. Her voice was fierce, almost angry, not at Jon, he understood, but at the situation. At the unfairness of a world that would give a boy extraordinary gifts and then break his body so he couldn't use them. Ji turned to face her. There may be. But it is not my art to teach. Jon looked up sharply. What do you mean? The old scholar moved to a scroll rack along the wall, his fingers trailing across the wooden handles until he found the one he wanted. He drew it out carefully and unrolled it across his desk. Your techniques strengthen the outside, he said. Muscles, speed, reflexes. They are external arts. Magnificent, but external. The scroll showed an anatomical diagram unlike any Jon had seen before. Not muscles and organs, bones. The human skeleton is rendered in intricate detail, with lines of energy flowing through it like rivers through a landscape. Characters he couldn't read annotated various points along the spine, the ribs, and the long bones of the arms and legs. In UTI, we understand that power has two foundations. The external, yes. But it's also internal. The skeleton itself. The bones, the marrow, are the structure that everything else is built upon. Ji traced one of the energy lines with his finger. There are arts that strengthen the internal foundation. Arts that rebuild bone from the marrow out. That turns a cracked cup into an iron vessel. Hope flickered in Jon's chest. Dangerous, fragile, but there. Can you teach me? No. This is not my discipline. Ji rolled the scroll closed again, handling it with the reverence of something precious. But I know someone who can. Jon. The twin practice swords rested against the wall where Sun Cao had left them. Jon couldn't stop looking at them. His failure, rendered in wood. His dream seemed to mock him from across the room. Tell me about these, Ji said, following his gaze. They're practice swords. For dual wielding. I can see that. Why too? Jon was quiet for a long moment. Then, because Ji had earned honesty, because Ji had just laid bare the truth of Jon's broken body without flinching, he answered. There was a knight in Westeros. Arthur Dane. They called him the Sword of the Morning. He told the story more fully this time. The legendary blade Dawn, forged from a fallen star, pale as milk and sharper than any steel. The knight who was so skilled he needed no shield, who carried a second sword instead because one weapon wasn't enough to contain his mastery. The tales of his victories, the Smiling Knight, the Kingswood Brotherhood, 100 other foes who'd fallen before him. He served 3 kings, Jon said. With honor, unblemished. They say he could have taken the throne himself if he'd wanted. But he chose duty instead. What happened to him? My father killed him. The words still felt strange, even after all this time. At the end of Robert's rebellion. This event took place at a tower located in the mountains of Dorne. They say father wept when it was done. He'd killed the finest knight in all the 7 kingdoms, and it broke something in him. Ji listened without interrupting. When Jon finished, the old scholar's expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. You wish to honor this knight's memory? This man your father killed? Jon hesitated. He'd never framed it quite that way. I want to be, like him. Good at something. Great at something. The words came slowly, dragged up from somewhere deep. Not just a survivor. Not just a bastard who runs and hides and barely makes it through. I wanted to be worthy. Of something. Of everything. You want to be worthy, Ji repeated. Not a question. Yes. Ji was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up one of the practice swords, testing its weight and examining the balance. There is honor in aspiration, he said. I do not mock your dream. Jon waited for the rest. But consider, this night, did he have another's memories flooding his mind? Did he have scars from chains and brands? Did he begin his training as a child with a body already broken by slavery and storms? No. Then you cannot walk his path. Not as he walked it. The words hit Jon like a blow to the chest. He had been aware of it, hidden beneath his hope. But hearing it spoken aloud. Dual wielding requires extraordinary coordination, stamina, and skeletal strength, Ji continued, setting the sword down. Your dominant hand is compromised. Your ribs cannot support the rotational force. Even if your breathing techniques worked perfectly, your body would fail you. He met Jon's eyes. You experienced this today. 3 seconds of glory, then collapse. If you continue on this path, the collapses will come faster. The damage will compound. Within a year, perhaps less, you will have destroyed what's left of your body's capacity. Then what? Jon's voice cracked. Give up? Accept that I'll never be. I didn't say that. Jon stopped. Looked at the old scholar. I said that you cannot follow Arthur Dayne's path in the same way he did. Ji moved back to the anatomical scroll, unrolling it again. But there are other paths to the same destination. He gestured to the diagram, the skeleton with its flowing lines of energy. The internal arts. The golden marrow. If your skeleton were rebuilt, strengthened from within, your body could support what your techniques demand. And then, perhaps, you could wield 2 swords without shattering yourself. But the foundation must come first. You cannot build a tower on sand. Jon stared at the scroll. The lines of energy that flowed through the bones like rivers. This strength is different from anything Marcus had taught him. How long? The first stage bone washing takes 2 to 3 months. Painful months, from what I understand. The second stage marrow refinement another 6 to 12. Full mastery takes years. Years. Jon did the math. Years before he could return to the twin swords. Years of building something invisible, internal, while his dream waited. That's a long time. You're 9 years old. You have time. Ji's voice softened slightly. The question is whether you have patience. Jon looked at the practice swords again. Then at the scroll. Then at his hands, the right one still trembling slightly, the fingers that had failed him when he needed them most. If I do this, he said slowly. The internal training. Will I be able to use them again? Someday. Ji didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was careful and honest. I don't know. Perhaps. If you complete the training, rebuild your body properly, and integrate both the internal and external arts, then perhaps you will succeed. That's not a promise. No. It's a possibility. That's all I can offer. A possibility. After everything, Winterfell, the slave pits, the storm, he was still chasing possibilities. But possibility was more than he'd had when he washed up on that beach. Who teaches this art? Jon asked. The internal training. A master named Feng Huang. He lives in a monastery in the mountains, 3 weeks' journey from here. They call him the Stone Tiger. Will he teach me? That depends on you. He doesn't take students easily. Ji began rolling up the anatomical scroll. You'll have to convince him you're worth his time. Mei Ling. The garden was golden in the late afternoon light. Mei Ling found Jon on their bench, the twin practice swords laid across his lap, staring at nothing. His white hair caught the sunlight, and for a moment she was reminded of the day she'd found him on the beach, pale and broken and barely alive. He'd come so far since then. And today, she'd watched him shatter all over again. She didn't speak immediately. She just sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She'd learned, over these months, that Jon needed space before he needed words. That sometimes the best thing she could do was simply be present. The garden was quiet around them. Birds sang in the cherry trees, leafy now, the blossoms long since fallen. A breeze stirred the branches, sending shadows dancing across the worn wood of the bench. Finally, Jon spoke. I wanted to be like him. Arthur Dayne. I know. I thought if I could fight like he did, two swords, unstoppable, then I'd be more than just this. He gestured vaguely at himself. He was at everything. A bastard. A slave. A refugee. Someone who survives but never really wins. Mei Ling considered her response carefully. She wanted to say the right thing, not the easy thing, but the true thing. You've won plenty, she said. When? You survived crossing the world. You survived the storm. You survived whatever happened before you came here. You still haven't told me all of it, and that's fine, but I know it was awful. She turned to face him directly, tucking one leg under her on the bench. You beat Sun Cao in that duel. You earned Master Ji's respect. You made my father, who doesn't notice anyone, actually pay attention to you. That's just surviving. That's not what? Not dramatic enough? Not like some dead knight from a story. Something sparked in her chest, not anger, exactly, but something fierce and protective. Something that refused to let Jon diminish himself. You know what I think about Arthur Dayne? She didn't wait for him to answer. I think he was probably born noble and rich, with the best teachers and the best swords, and everyone telling him he was special his whole life. I think he never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from or whether someone was going to chain him up and brand him like an animal. He was still the greatest. He's dead, Jon. Her voice rose, sharp enough to make him look at her. He's dead, and you're alive. That's not little. That's everything. She grabbed his hand, the damaged one, the right one, and squeezed. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. She held on anyway. You don't need to be Arthur Dayne. You need to be Jon. The Jon who walked out of slavery and crossed the sea, showed up on a beach half dead and still kept breathing. Her voice softened, the fierce edge giving way to something gentler. That's the person I pulled out of the sand. That's my friend. Not some legend from a story. You. Jon was quiet for a long moment. His grey eyes searched her face, looking for something, certainty, maybe, or truth. Whatever he found seemed to settle something in him, because some of the tension drained from his shoulders. Master Ji says there's a way, he said finally. Training that could rebuild my body from the inside. Make me strong enough to do what I want to do. The stone tiger. You were listening. I'm always listening. You just don't notice. A small sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close. This was the first indication of any emotion other than despair since his collapse. It will take years. And it won't be easy. Nothing with you is easy. She smiled despite herself. I'm used to it. You'd wait? For me to come back? Every time I have to leave for training. The question was fragile, uncertain, the question of someone who'd spent too long believing he wasn't worth waiting for. Mei Ling squeezed his hand harder. Jon. I sat with you when you couldn't even talk. When you woke up screaming and didn't know where you were. When you flinched every time a door opened. She held his gaze, willing him to believe her. I'll wait. However long it takes. You're stuck with me, remember? Something shifted in his expression. The shame and defeat were still there, but underneath them something else. Something like hope. Thank you. Mei Ling. You're welcome. Now stop moping. We have a plan. She released his hand and sat back, assuming her most businesslike expression. You're going to learn this bone training, and then you're going to be even more annoyingly good at fighting, and I'm going to watch and say I knew you when you were just a sad boy who washed up from the sea. Jon laughed. It was a small sound, rusty with disuse, but real. That's a terrible speech. I'm 10. I'm allowed to be terrible. Jon. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when Jon made his decision. He looked at the twin swords in his lap, the wooden blades he'd carved himself, sanded smooth, and balanced as well as his skill allowed. He'd held them for hours now, clinging to them like they might anchor him to the dream they represented. But dreams couldn't be held. Only pursued. And occasionally the pursuit required letting go. Mei Ling. I want you to keep these for me. She looked at the practice swords, then at him. Keep them? Why? Master Ji says I need to rebuild my foundation before I can use techniques like these. Years of training. A different path. He ran his fingers along the wooden blade one last time. The grain was smooth under his touch, familiar from weeks of practice in the grey hours before dawn. If I keep them, I'll be tempted. Every day, I'll look at them and think about Arthur Dayne and try to do too much too soon. He met her eyes. I know myself. I'll push when I should wait. The admission cost him something. It was one thing to fail, and it was another to acknowledge that he didn't trust himself not to fail again. But if you have them, he continued. If they're somewhere safe, waiting for me, then I can let go. For now. Do what I need to do. And when I'm ready, when my body can handle it, I'll come back for them. He held the swords out to her. Keep them safe. Until I'm worthy of them. Mei Ling took them carefully, as if they were made of glass rather than wood. She understood, he could tell. The situation wasn't just about practice weapons. It was about trust. About placing his dream in someone else's hands because he couldn't carry it safely himself. How will you know? She asked. When are you ready? I'll know. And so will you. She nodded slowly, her fingers curling around the wooden hilts. I'll keep them in my room. Wrapped in silk. No one touches them but me. Thank you. Stop thanking me. But she was smiling. It's what friends do. She took the cloth he'd used to hide the swords and wrapped them again, carefully, the way you'd wrap something precious. Something that mattered. When you're ready, she said. When you come back from the Stone Tiger's Mountain and you're strong enough, I'll give these back. And then you can show me what Arthur Dayne really looked like. I might be different by then. The training might change me in ways I can't predict. You'll still be Jon. She looked up at him, the wrapped swords cradled in her arms. That's the part that matters. They sat together as the sun sank behind the mountains. Gold turned to orange, orange to purple, and purple to the deep blue of approaching night. The first stars emerged, pale and distant, scattered across the sky like scattered dreams. Jon's hands were empty now. The weight of the swords was gone. He'd expected to feel loss. And he did, a hollow ache where the dream had been, the knowledge that Arthur Dayne was further away than ever. But something else had taken its place. Something lighter. Possibility. Not the wild, desperate possibility of a boy trying to become a legend. Something quieter. Something that began with acceptance instead of denial. I am damaged. I am not crippled. There is a difference. I cannot walk Arthur Dayne's path as he walked it. But there are other paths. I am 9 years old. I have time. Mei Ling. I'm scared. The admission came easier than he'd expected. Of the training. Of what happens if it doesn't work. Of everything. She didn't dismiss his fear. She didn't tell him that everything would be fine. I know, she said simply. But you'll do it anyway. Because you're you. A pause. I will be very disappointed if you give up, and I know that you hate disappointing me. I do. Yes. It's one of your better qualities. Jon almost smiled. I didn't know I had better qualities. You have several. Stubbornness. Surviving things that should kill you. Looking dramatically sad in gardens. She counted them off using her fingers. Also, you listen when I talk, which is more than most people do. Those don't sound like qualities. Those sound like character flaws. It's all about perspective. The night deepened around them. The garden filled with shadows, the cherry trees becoming dark shapes against a darker sky. Somewhere in the fortress, torches were being lit, servants preparing for evening. The ordinary business of life continued while Jon sat in the quiet dark and tried to imagine who he would become. The stone tiger. The golden marrow art. A new path. And someday 2 swords, like Arthur Dayne. But first, patience. Foundation. Becoming something new. Mei Ling leaned her head against his shoulder. Jon didn't flinch. This is what home feels like, he thought. Not a place. A person. Someone who holds your broken pieces and says, "I'll wait." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. Tomorrow, everything would change. He would begin preparing for the journey to the mountains. He would learn what little Ji could teach him about the internal arts. He would take the first steps on a path that would lead him away from everything he'd built here. But tonight, in a garden that smelled of summer and memory, a boy who had crossed the world finally understood something important. He wasn't Arthur Dayne. He never would be. But maybe he could become something else. Something that was his alone. Something built from the wreckage of his dreams and the strength of the people who believed in him. It wasn't the ending he'd wanted. It was better. It was a beginning. Chapter 10, The Stone Tiger Part 1. Jon. Grey light seeped through the window, turning the familiar room into something strange and shadowless. Jon had been awake for hours, watching the darkness slowly pale, counting the moments until he had to move. His packed bundle sat by the door pitifully small. A change of clothes. A few coins Ji had given him. Nothing else. The jade wolf pendant hung against his chest, hidden under his shirt. He touched it once, feeling the cool stone warm against his fingers. Mei Ling's gift. The twin swords she's keeping. Everything I'm leaving behind. He'd slept poorly. Dreams of the training yard collapsing, of Feng's face imagined, since he'd never seen it turning away in disgust. Dreams of Arthur Dayne's ghost, watching him fail. Dreams of drowning, of chains, of all the ways his body had broken and might break again. But beneath the anxiety, something harder. A core of determination that the nightmares couldn't touch. The month of waiting had given him time to accept what was coming. He'd spent it preparing meditation with Ji, gentle exercises to maintain what strength he had, and long hours in the garden trying to find the calm that might keep him whole when the real test came. He wasn't ready. He knew that. He'd never be ready. But he was going anyway. Jon looked around the small chamber that had been his home for nearly a year. The bed where he'd recovered from the shipwreck, where Mei Ling had sat reading while he drifted in and out of fever. The window overlooked the garden, where cherry blossoms had fallen like pink snow and summer leaves now rustled in the pre-dawn breeze. The desk, where Ji had taught him calligraphy, history, and philosophy, was where Jon had learned to think in a language that wasn't his own. I might not come back to this room. I might come back different. Either way, this part is ending. He picked up his bundle. Didn't look back. The courtyard was quiet in the grey morning, the fortress still sleeping around them. 3 horses stood saddled near the gate, one for Ji, one for Jon, and one for supplies. Master Ji was already mounted, his travelling robe slightly too fine for a mountain journey, his face composed in the patient expression of someone who had made this trip before. The air was cool, carrying the salt smell of the distant sea. Jon breathed it in, trying to fix it in his memory. He might not smell the sea again for months. 4 years. He scanned the courtyard, uncertain about what he was searching for. General Kai was not present. War councils, Ji had explained yesterday. The political situation worsens. The general cannot spare the time. Jon understood. He wasn't relevant enough for a general's farewell. A former slave, a foreign curiosity useful perhaps, but not essential. Just another investment in the fortress's future, one that might pay off or might not. That's fine. I didn't expect. Movement caught his eye. A high window in the keep, overlooking the courtyard. General Kai stood there, silhouetted against lamplight. Watching. Their eyes met across the distance. Jon couldn't read the general's expression too far, too dim, the features lost in shadow. But Kai nodded once. He made a small gesture to express his gratitude. Acknowledgement. Jon nodded back. Maybe I matter more than I thought. Alternatively, he might simply be monitoring his investment. Either way, he was watching. That was something. Hoofbeats on stone. Jon turned. Mei Ling emerged from the stable, leading Zephyr. The mare was fully saddled and packed for travel. Mei Ling wore riding clothes practical and worn, not the fine silks she usually dressed in. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her expression held the particular stubbornness Jon had learned to recognize. What are you doing? Coming with you. Obviously. Jon stared at her. Mei Ling, you can't. I can. I am. It's already decided. This is highly irregular, Ji said from his horse, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had already lost this argument. The journey is difficult. The monastery is austere. Your father. My father is in his third consecutive war council. Something bitter flickered across Mei Ling's face, quickly hidden. He won't notice I'm gone until we're back. The mountain trails are dangerous for inexperienced. I've ridden harder trails than you, old man. She swung up into Zephyr's saddle with practiced ease. Remember the hunt last autumn? Did you fall off your horse at the river crossing? Ji's mouth tightened. Jon suspected there was a story there, one with more embarrassing details than the old scholar wanted remembered. I'm not asking permission, Mei Ling continued. I'm coming as far as the monastery. I want to see him off. Make sure he actually goes through with it. She grinned at Jon, the familiar sharp smile that had greeted him on a beach nearly a year ago. Someone has to make sure you don't run away. I don't run away. You absolutely run away. It's one of your talents. You're excellent at it. Ji sighed, the sound of a man who had known Mei Ling since birth and recognized futility when he saw it. You can come as far as the monastery. But you cannot stay. Master Feng does not allow outsiders during training. I know. I just want to be there. For the beginning. Her eyes found Jon's. Softer now, beneath the bravado. He saw what she wasn't saying, that she was scared for him, that she didn't want to say goodbye in a courtyard while servants watched, and that this journey was as much for her as it was for him. Thank you, he said quietly. For coming. Where else would I be? The gates opened. The three riders passed through in the grey morning. Behind them, the fortress, safety, comfort, everything Jon had built in Yiti. Ahead, the mountain road, winding upward into mist. This is it. Whatever I am when I come back, if I come back I won't be who I am now. The boy who washed up on a beach is going to die on that mountain. Something else will come down. He touched the jade wolf through his shirt. Let it be something worth keeping. The sun rose behind clouds as they rode. The fortress shrank, became a toy, and a memory. The road climbed. Jon didn't look back. Jon. The landscape transformed as they ascended. First came the cultivated lands, terraced rice fields stepping up the mountainside like a giant's staircase, emerald green and shimmering with water. Farmers were already at work despite the early hour, knee-deep in the paddies, their broad hats bobbing as they bent and straightened in the ancient rhythm of planting. None of them looked up as the travelers passed. They had their concerns, their lives, and three riders on the mountain road meant nothing to them. Jon watched the irrigation channels carved into the slopes, engineering that must have taken generations, water flowing through stone passages older than the current dynasty. The smell of wet earth and growing things filled the air, the particular scent of human labor transforming wilderness into sustenance. Then the forests swallowed them. Pine and cedar, ancient trees with trunks wider than horses, their branches interlacing overhead to create a living ceiling. The road narrowed and became rougher, hoofbeats echoing differently against packed earth instead of stone. Birdsong filled the green silence, species Jon didn't recognize, melodies he'd never heard. A stream ran parallel to the road, appearing and disappearing through the undergrowth, its voice a constant companion. Shadows deepened. The air cooled. Jon's damaged lungs noticed the thinning air, first a tightness when he breathed too deep, a reminder that his body had limits his spirit didn't want to acknowledge. Finally, they emerged above the treeline. Bare rock and scrub grass stretched before them, the world opening up like a held breath finally released. The view was staggering, yeti spreading below them, a patchwork of green and gold, rivers threading through the landscape like silver embroidery. Clouds drifted at eye level, and sometimes below, transforming the riders into beings who had climbed above the mortal world into something else entirely. Ancient shrines dotted the landscape, small stone structures no larger than a man, with offerings of incense and fruit placed before weathered statues. Some were clearly tended, the stones swept clean, with fresh flowers in simple vases. Others had been abandoned to moss and time, the statues worn faceless by centuries of wind and rain. Jon had seen beauty before. Winterfell's stark majesty in winter made the entire world appear white and silent. The Jade Sea's endless blue stretched to horizons that promised nothing but more water. Braavos rises from the lagoon like a dream of towers and bridges. But the atmosphere was different. This place felt sacred. "It's like the gods would," he said, almost to himself. "But bigger. Older." Mei Ling looked at him curiously from Zephyr's back. "God's wood? A sacred place? In Winterfell? Where the old gods live?" He struggled to explain something he'd never had to put into words before. There was a heart tree, a weirwood, with a face carved into the bark. People said the gods watched through those eyes. When you sat beneath it, you could feel something. Presence. Wait. We have places like that. Mei Ling's voice went soft in a way Jon rarely heard. "My mother used to take me to a temple in the mountains when I was small. She said the gods lived closer to the sky." A pause. She rarely mentioned her mother. "Do you still go to the temple?" "No. It burned during one of the wars. This happened before I was old enough to remember it clearly." She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone, similar to how people discuss painful topics they find difficult to acknowledge. Jon understood. He'd learned to speak that way himself. Everyone here has lost something. The wars have taken from everyone. They made camp as the sun began its descent, finding a sheltered hollow where previous travelers had clearly stopped before a fire ring of blackened stones, a cleared area for sleeping, and the ground worn smooth by countless bodies. Ji built a fire with practiced efficiency while Mei Ling tended the horses. Jon gathered additional wood, moving carefully on the unfamiliar terrain, his body protesting the day's exertion in ways it hadn't before the training yard collapse. "You're damaged," Ji had said. "There's a difference between damaged and crippled." Jon was learning to feel that difference in every muscle, every breath. They ate simple travel food, dried meat, rice cakes, and a flask of tea Ji heated over the fire. The silence was comfortable, the kind shared by people who'd spent enough time together that words weren't always necessary. Stars emerged overhead, scattered across a sky so vast and dark that Jon felt like he might fall upward into it. "Tell me about Master Feng." He asked it casually, but his heart beat faster. Tomorrow or the day after he'd face this man who held his future in his hands. Ji sipped his tea, considering the question. "We studied together, Feng and I 60 years ago. Young men full of certainty and ambition. You were friends. We were rivals. Then friends. Then something between." A ghost of a smile crossed the old scholar's face. 60 years is a long time to know someone. What happened? We trained at the same academy, one of the finest martial schools that existed before the First Civil War. Feng was brilliant. Everyone knew he'd be a master someday. His understanding of the internal arts was intuitive and instinctive, while the rest of us had to struggle for every insight. Ji stared into the fire, his eyes seeing something far away. I was competent. Good enough, but not exceptional. So you became a scholar instead. I became what I was suited for. Feng became what he was suited for. Different paths to the same mountain. He gestured at the peaks above them, invisible now in darkness. He chose the martial path. The stone tiger is art. 60 years of cultivation, refinement, and mastery. There are perhaps 3 living practitioners who equal him. Perhaps none who surpass him. Jon absorbed this. He'd known Feng was skilled. You didn't earn names like Stone Tiger by being ordinary. But hearing it from Ji, who never exaggerated, made the stakes feel more real. What's he like? As a teacher? Difficult. Demanding. He sees weakness the way a hawk sees mice from a great distance, with perfect clarity. Will he teach me? Ji set down his teacup, turning to face Jon fully. That depends on you, not him. What do you mean? Feng isn't concerned about talent. Talent is common. Every generation produces a dozen talented young martial artists. Most amount to nothing. What does he care about? Purpose. The word hung in the air, weighted with meaning Jon didn't fully understand. He will test you, Ji continued. Not your strength or your skill, those are secondary. He will test your purpose. Why do you want power? What you'll do with it? What's the right answer? If I told you, it wouldn't be genuine. He'll know. He always knows. From across the fire, Mei Ling spoke. She'd been listening silently, unusual for her. What if he refuses to teach Jon? Ji stared into the flames for a long moment. Then we return to the fortress. And find another path. Is there another path? There's always another path. Whether it leads where you want to go, that's a different question. Jon felt the stakes settling on his shoulders like a physical weight. The moment wasn't just a chance, it might be his only chance. No pressure. My entire future depends on convincing an old man I've never met that I am worth his time. Later, when Ji's breathing had steadied into the rhythm of deep sleep, Jon sat with his back against a rock, looking up at stars he was still learning to name. Yti's constellations were different from Westeros, different stories, different gods, and different patterns imposed on the same ancient light. Mei Ling appeared beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the mountain cold. Can't sleep. Can you? No. She settled next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The fire had burned down to embers, painting them both in shades of orange and shadow. Are you scared? Jon considered lying. Decided not to. Yes. Good. You should be. This is a big thing. Thanks. Very comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to be honest. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. What if he says no? What if you came all this way and he just sends you back? Jon's hands curled into fists in his lap, then slowly relaxed. Then I don't know what my next steps will be. Ji says there are other paths, but this is the one. The one that might actually work. If it doesn't. He trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. If it doesn't, then maybe I'm just broken forever. Maybe the breathing techniques will keep destroying me until there's nothing left. Maybe I'll never be able to. He stopped. He'd said too much. Then you come back. Mei Ling's voice was simple and certain. You come back to the fortress, and we figure out something else. That's what we do, right? Figure things out. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy. Simple. She reached out in the darkness and found his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow or whenever you meet this stone tiger person, you're still Jon. Still my friend. That doesn't change because some old man on a mountain says yes or no. He squeezed her hand. Didn't trust his voice. Thank you. For coming. You didn't have to. I know. That's what makes it matter. They sat together, hands linked, watching stars wheel overhead. Neither spoke again for a long time. Some things didn't need words. Jon. The monastery seemed to come together rather than simply appear. The final stretch of road was carved directly into the mountainside, stone steps worn smooth by countless feet, steep enough that the horses had to be led rather than ridden. Jon's lungs burned with each breath, the thin air scraping at the scar tissue that would never fully heal. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold. First, he saw only mist. Then shapes formed within it, dark lines that became walls, pillars, and a gate. It was as if the monastery had been waiting for them to prove themselves worthy of seeing it. Ancient stone, grey and green with lichen and age. Walls that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, no clear line where natural rock ended and construction began. A gate of weathered wood, thick as Jon's arm, bound with iron gone rust red with centuries of exposure. No ornamentation. No banners. No signs of welcome. Just stones, wood, and silence. This place is old, Jon thought. Not like the fortress is old the way a grandfather is old, still living, still changing. This is old, the way mountains are. Like it's always been here. Like it will always be here. It doesn't care if I live or die. Before they could announce themselves, the gate swung inward. A monk stood within, middle-aged, head-shaved, wearing simple grey robes. He studied them with calm, incurious eyes. Master Ji. You're expected. The courtyard beyond was austere, swept stone, a few carefully maintained trees, and buildings arranged with geometric precision. Everything was clean, everything was ordered, and everything spoke of discipline so complete it had become invisible. Monks went about their business. Two swept a walkway with synchronized movements, their brooms rising and falling in perfect unison. Three practiced forms in an open space, their motions slow and deliberate, each flowing into the next like water finding its level. An elderly monk carried water up a flight of stairs, the heavy buckets seemingly weightless in his hands. Jon watched them move, and something nagged at him. He initially sensed something strange that he couldn't identify. Then he realized, they were rooted. Every step, every gesture had weight, not heaviness, but connection. It was as if they were connected to the earth itself. It was like the ground was holding them up as much as they were standing on it. Even the old monk with the water buckets, each step planted him like a tree, immovable and certain. That's the art, Jon thought. What they've cultivated. What I might learn. If Feng accepts me. Mei Ling leaned close, her voice low. They walk like they're made of stone. That's the golden marrow art, Ji said quietly, overhearing. What they've built. What you may learn. May. Not will. May. They were led to a larger courtyard at the monastery's heart. Stone benches lined the edges. In the center stood a flat rock worn smooth by time, ancient, and clearly significant. Wait here. Master Feng will see you when he's ready. The monk left without further explanation. They sat. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted. Jon's anxiety built with each passing moment. Was this a test? Were they being evaluated even now, watched by unseen eyes that would report their every fidget and sigh to the master? His back straightened. His hands stilled in his lap. Should someone be observing him, he would provide them with no grounds for criticism. Mei Ling fidgeted beside him, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. She stopped herself, started again, and stopped. Her leg bounced restlessly until she caught Jon's sidelong glance and forced it still. Ji sat in perfect stillness, the stillness of someone who had waited before and knew how to make peace with uncertainty. The courtyard was immaculate. Not a leaf out of place. Not a pebble disturbed. The stone beneath Jon's feet was worn in patterns, footwork diagrams, he realized, carved into the rock by countless generations of students practicing the same forms. How many people have sat where I'm sitting? How many waited for Feng's judgment? How many failed? An hour passed. Another. The sun crept across the sky, and the shadows lengthened, and still no one came. Mei Ling leaned close. How long do we wait? As long as necessary, Ji answered. This is part of it. Part of what? The test. Everything here is a test. Jon's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He forced himself to breathe evenly. I can wait. I've waited in worse places than this. I waited in a slave pit for death that never came. I can wait for an old man on a mountain. Jon. He appeared without warning. One moment, the courtyard entrance was empty. Next, a man stood there. Jon hadn't seen him approach. Hadn't heard footsteps. No door had opened, no curtain had moved. He was simply not there, and then he was. How? Jon's first impression was of size, small. Feng Huang was barely taller than Jon himself, a slight, compact figure in grey robes identical to every other monk's. If Jon had passed him in a crowd, he might not have looked twice. His second impression was of density. Feng's size was deceiving. There was a weight to his presence, a gravity that had nothing to do with physical mass. Like he was made of something heavier than flesh. It felt as if the air around him was thicker and more substantial. His third impression was of stillness. Utterly, completely still. Not the stillness of someone standing quietly, the stillness of stone, of mountains, of things that had never moved and never would. The face was 70 years old, perhaps more. Time had compressed rather than withered him, skin like weathered leather, creased but not fragile. A thin beard, is grey and carefully maintained. Eyes that gave nothing away, black as deep water, seeing everything, revealing nothing. Feng's gaze passed over Jon, dismissed Mei Ling, and landed on Ji. Ji. You've gotten fat. Feng. You've gotten ruder. A moment of silence. Then something shifted in Feng's face, not quite a smile, but something close. He and Ji embraced, briefly and formally, but Jon saw genuine warmth beneath the stiffness. 60 years, and you still can't stay away. 60 years, and you still can't descend the mountain like a normal person. The mountain doesn't bore me. The flatlands do. Then Feng turned to Jon, and the warmth vanished like a candle blown out. What remained was clinical, detached, the gaze of someone examining a piece of equipment to determine if it was worth repairing. This is the one. This is Jon. Western. Damaged. Young. Not questions. Observations. Facts noted and filed. Feng began to circle him slowly, predator examining prey, merchant examining goods. Jon forced himself to stand still, to meet the old man's gaze when it passed his face. Show me your hands. Jon extended them. The cold weather still caused his right hand to tremble slightly, a reminder of the trauma he had endured in Yunkai. Today, in the mountain chill, it held steady only through force of will. Feng took the right hand and examined the fingers. His grip was gentle but immovable. Jon couldn't have pulled away if he'd tried. The old man's fingers probed each joint, each bone, with the precision of someone who understood exactly what he was feeling. Broken. Reset. Still weak. The second and third fingers will never have full strength. He released the hand. Remove your shirt. Jon hesitated. The brand. The whip scars. The marks from the shipwreck. All of it would be visible, the complete history of his suffering written on his skin. Feng waited. His expression didn't change. Jon pulled his shirt over his head. The examination was thorough. Feng's eyes tracked over Jon's torso with clinical precision, cataloging each piece of damage. He traced the harpy brand on Jon's shoulder with one finger, the mark of Grazdan Mo Yunkai, the mark of slavery. He counted the whip scarring across Jon's back, his lips moving silently. He noted the newer scars from the shipwreck, the still visible lines where debris had torn his skin. When he pressed on Jon's ribs, feeling the old breaks and the improperly healed fractures, Jon couldn't suppress a hiss of pain. Yunkai. Slave pits. Yes. You escaped. I survived. Not the same thing. Escaping requires agency. Surviving requires only luck. Then I was lucky. And then I made choices. Something shifted in Feng's eyes. Interest, perhaps. This was also a sign that Jon was not entirely passive in his own story. Show me what you can do. Jon glanced at Ji, uncertain. You want me to? Your external arts. The breathing techniques. Show me. Jon's heart rate spiked. His techniques had nearly destroyed him in the training yard. Using them at full power could trigger a collapse, a flashback, or humiliation in front of the one person he needed to impress. But refusing wasn't an option. Controlled. Limited. Enough to show him, not enough to break. He settled into a stance. Reached for water, breathing the calmest, most controlled of his techniques. Let it fill him, like cool water filling a vessel. He moved through a basic form. Enhanced speed, but restrained. Fluid motion, but careful. His body cooperated. No cramps. No pain. Again, Feng said. Faster. Jon pushed harder. Thunder breathing with minimal intensity. His speed doubled. The movements blurred. His ribs twinged a warning. His right hand threatened to cramp. He stopped before failure came. Silence. Then Feng spoke. Interesting. External power without internal foundation. Like a thunderstorm in a paper house. That's why I'm here. To build the foundation. To build a foundation, you must first clear the ground. The ground is not clear. Feng's gaze bored into him. It is cluttered with damage, trauma, and obsession. The word landed like a slap. No. Jon's chest tightened. Behind him, he heard Mei Ling's sharp intake of breath. Master Feng Ji began. He is damaged. Body and spirit. Teaching him would be building on sand. Whatever I construct will fall. Jon stepped forward, desperation breaking through his composure. I can endure the training. Whatever pain. Endurance is not enough. Feng faced him fully. Those ancient eyes observe everything and forgive nothing. You want power. I see it in you. The hunger. The desperation. He stepped closer, not threatening, but intense. Close enough that Jon could see the individual threads of grey in his beard. But power for what? To avenge yourself on those who hurt you? Are you trying to prove that you are worthy of the legend of some dead Westerosi knight? Jon's shock must have shown on his face. How does he know about Arthur Dane? Ji's letters are thorough, Feng said, reading the question before Jon could ask it. I know about the two swords. About your aspirations. The judgment came down like a hammer. You chase a ghost. A dead man's shadow. That is not the purpose. That is obsession. I do not train the obsessed, they destroy themselves eventually and waste my time in the process. It's not. You would disagree. Feng's voice was quiet, but it cut like steel. Then tell me. Why do you want strength? It's not about how you'll use it. What is your motivation for wanting it? What drives you? What keeps you moving when your body fails? The question hung in the air. Simple. Devastating. Why do you want strength? Jon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He knew what he wanted to say: to protect people, to be worthy, to become something more than a bastard and a slave, but the words felt hollow even before he spoke them. Rehearsed. False. Why did he want strength? To be like Arthur Dane? But Feng had already dismissed that as obsession. To protect himself? That was survival, not purpose. To never be helpless again? That was fear dressed up as ambition. Why? The silence stretched. Jon's mind raced through answers and discarded each one. Nothing felt true enough. Nothing felt like the core of who he was. As I thought. Feng turned away. Return to the flatlands, Ji. The boy is not ready. Perhaps in a few years, if he survives his techniques, he may find purpose. Until then, I have nothing to teach him. He walked toward the courtyard entrance, silent, unhurried, and final. Jon stood frozen, watching his dreams collapse around him. Mei Ling's face in his peripheral vision pale, shocked, and furious on his behalf. She started to speak, to protest. But what was there to say? Feng had asked a question. Jon had no answer. This is it. This is where it ends. All the suffering, all the survival, all the hope. And I failed because I couldn't answer one simple question. Why do I want strength? Why? Feng's grey robes disappeared through the courtyard entrance, taking Jon's future with them. And in the silence left behind, a boy who had crossed the world felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with bones. Chapter 11, The Stone Tiger Part 2. Jon. The courtyard entrance stood empty, as if Feng Huang had never been there at all. Jon couldn't move. His mind kept cycling through what had just happened, the same loop repeating like water trapped in a drain. He said no. He asked a question, and I had no answer. It's over. His legs felt weak. His hands, the damaged hands he'd come here to heal, hung at his sides, useless. The shirt he'd removed for examination lay crumpled on the stone. He should pick it up. He couldn't make himself move. Why do you want strength? The question echoed in the silence Feng had left behind. Jon had answers. He'd thought he had answers. To be like Arthur Dane. To be worthy. To never be helpless again. But when Feng asked, the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, Jon had known they weren't enough. They were true, but they weren't the truth. That's it. Mei Ling's voice cut through the silence, sharp with outrage. She was on her feet, glaring at the empty entrance as if she could summon Feng back through sheer force of will. He asks one question and walks away? Jon crossed the world. He survived things that would have killed anyone else. And this old man takes one look and says no. Mei Ling Ji began. Don't tell me to be calm. This isn't fair. Fairness is not Master Feng's concern. Purpose is. What does that even mean? Ji's gaze found Jon's. His expression was sorrowful but not surprised, as if he'd expected this might happen. As if he'd hoped it wouldn't but prepared himself for it anyway. It means Jon must find his answer. Or accept that there isn't one. Jon finally spoke. His voice came out rough, barely audible. He's right. Mei Ling turned to him, startled. What? He asked why I want strength. I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. He forced himself to move, bent down, picked up his shirt, and pulled it over his head. The familiar motions helped him think. Gave his hands something to do while his mind raced. I said I wanted to be like Arthur Dane. That's not a reason. That's a fantasy. A story I told myself. You want to protect people, Mei Ling protested. You told me that. In the garden, when you gave me the swords. I know what I said. But when he asked, I couldn't say it. Because I don't think I believed it. Not all the way. He looked at her, really looked. Her face was flushed with anger on his behalf, her hands curled into fists at her sides. She was ready to fight the stone tiger himself if it would help. But it wouldn't help. This wasn't a battle anyone could fight for him. What do I actually want? He asked, more to himself than to her. Why did I really come here? The silence stretched. Mei Ling didn't have an answer. Neither did Ji. Only Jon could find this. He looked at the courtyard entrance. Feng was somewhere beyond it, having dismissed him as unworthy. I could leave. Go back to the fortress. Except that this path is closed. Or... where did he go? Ji blinked. What? Master Feng. Where did he go? Is he still in the monastery? Jon, he refused you. Pursuing him would be. I know what it would be. Where is he? The old scholar studied Jon for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps. Or perhaps he recognized something he hadn't expected to see. The eastern terrace. He watches the sunset there. But Jon. I have to try. If he refuses me again, at least I'll know I gave him a real answer. He started walking toward the entrance. Jon. Mei Ling called. He paused. Looked back. What are you going to say? I don't know yet. But I'll know when I get there. He walked through the entrance, leaving them behind. Jon. The stone path wound upward, past meditation alcoves and training platforms, until the monastery fell away below him. Jon ascended the path without considering the effort involved. His lungs burned in the thin air, his legs ached from the days of travel, but none of it mattered. His body was just a vehicle carrying him toward something he didn't yet understand. Why do you want strength? The question accompanied him like a second shadow. He turned it over in his mind, examining it from every angle, but the answers that surfaced felt hollow. Rehearsed. The kind of things a boy might say to impress a master, not the kind of things that came from somewhere real. The eastern terrace opened before him, a flat expanse of rock jutting from the mountainside like a shelf. Nothing ornamental. Just stone and sky, and the dying sun is painting everything gold and crimson. Feng Huang stood at the terrace's edge, his back to Jon, watching the sunset. He didn't turn when Jon approached. You followed me. It wasn't a question. Yes. I told you to leave. I know. Silence. The sun sank lower, touching the distant peaks. The light caught Feng's grey robes, turning them to bronze. You have something to say. Say it. Jon's mind raced. He had seconds. Maybe less. Feng's patience wasn't infinite. Why do I want strength? Think. Really think. The easy answers came first, and he rejected them as quickly as they surfaced. To be like Arthur Dane, no. That was a fantasy, not a purpose. Chasing a dead man's shadow was easier than standing still. The goal was to never feel helpless again. Closer. But he's still about himself. Still about what he lacked, what he feared, and what he needed to feel whole. I need to demonstrate my worthiness. Worthy of what? To whom? The answer was ego dressed up as aspiration. Why do those answers feel hollow? The hollowness stems from the fact that those answers were centered around him. They focused on what he desired. The focus was on what he lacked. What he needed. Feng had seen through that. He'd probably seen 100 boys who wanted power for themselves, boys who dressed their ambition in noble language but couldn't hide the hunger beneath. What makes me different? Am I different? The memories came unbidden. They did not appear as flashbacks, nor did they evoke the overwhelming terror of trauma. As remembering. The memories are clear and sharp, akin to the light streaming through a window. Alia. The cross. The nails pierced through her wrists and ankles. The way she'd hung there for 3 hours, each breath a battle, her body fighting to live while the wood and iron slowly killed her. Jon had been chained 10 feet away. Close enough to see every moment of her suffering. He was too far away to touch her, comfort her, or do anything except watch. She'd found his eyes at the end. She endured pain, exhaustion, and the knowledge that she was dying while no one would save her. Not your fault. Jon Snow. Be free. She'd died for him. He had attempted to flee but failed. He couldn't muster the strength to save her. Be free. He hadn't been free. He'd been chained in the dirt, watching her suffocate, and the only freedom he'd found was in surviving long enough to run. Robb. The training yard at Winterfell. Wooden swords crossed between them, both boys breathing hard, grinning despite the bruises. You're my brother, Jon. I don't care what anyone says. He'd said it so simply. So certainly. As if the world's opinion didn't matter, as if Lady Catelyn's hatred couldn't touch them, as if family was something you chose rather than something that chose you. Jon had left him. Ran away in the night, leaving only silence and questions behind. To protect him, he'd told himself. He believed that the people who hated him might hurt the boy in order to reach him. But that wasn't entirely true. He'd also left because he was scared. Because staying meant facing what he was becoming, and running was easier than standing still. Now Robb was half a world away. Jon didn't know if he was safe. I didn't know if he'd survived the wars and politics and dangers of Westeros. I didn't know if he still remembered the brother who'd vanished one night and never returned. Does he think I'm dead? Does he still wonder where I went? Does he hate me for leaving? Mei Ling. The beach. A girl's face swam into focus, with dark hair and worried eyes and a voice that cut through the fog of fever and exhaustion. I'll get help. Don't worry. You're going to be okay. She hadn't known him. Hadn't owed him anything. He was a foreign boy with white hair and slave brands, washed up from a storm that had killed better men. She'd saved him anyway. The garden. Her hand in his was an anchor and a comfort. You're stuck with me forever. Last night under the stars. Her fingers intertwined with his in the darkness. Whatever happens, you're still Jon. Still my friend. That doesn't change because some old man on a mountain says yes or no. She'd found him when he had nothing. She decided he was worth saving and never changed her mind. Not when he flinched at sudden noises. Not when he woke screaming from nightmares. Not when his body broke in the training yard and everyone whispered that he was cursed. What happens to her if the wars come to Tian Li? If enemies breach the walls? What will happen to her if someone hurts her while I am too weak to stop it? Jon spoke. His voice was rough. He hadn't planned these words, they were coming from somewhere deeper than thought, dragged up from a place he'd never shown anyone. When I was a slave, I knew a woman named Alia. Feng didn't turn. But he was listening. Jon could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She helped me try to escape. She died for it. Crucified. I watched her die for 3 hours because I couldn't do anything to stop it. The words hurt coming out. It felt like pulling thorns from flesh, necessary, but painful. She told me to be free. She uttered these words with her final breath. Be free. But I wasn't free. I was chained 10 feet away, watching her suffocate. Jon's voice cracked. He didn't try to hide it. Before that, in Winterfell, the place I came from, I had a brother. Robb. Although we were not related by blood, he was still my brother. He told me I was family when everyone else said I was nothing. He paused. Breathed. Kept going. I left him. Ran away in the night. To protect him, I told myself. I feared that the people who hated me might hurt him in order to reach me. But really, I left because I was scared. Now that he is half a world away, I am unsure of his safety, and he is unaware of whether I am alive. The sun touched the horizon. Gold became crimson. After the storm, when I washed up on this coast, I encountered a girl who was there to help me. Mei Ling. She found me on the beach. Pulled me out of the sand. Sat with me when I couldn't speak, when I woke up screaming, and when I flinched at every sound. Jon's throat tightened. He pushed through. She's the reason I'm standing here. Not because she trained me or gave me power. Because she stayed. Because she decided I was worth saving and never changed her mind. The core. The truth lies underneath all the other truths. You asked why I want strength. What I'll do with it. Feng still hadn't moved. Feng had not yet turned. I don't have a plan. I don't have a destiny or a prophecy. I'm not the hero of a story. Jon's voice steadied. Hardened. But I know what I won't do. I won't watch another person die because I was too weak to save them. I won't lose someone else because my body broke before my will did. I won't be the one who survives while everyone around me falls. The words came faster now, surer. I want strength so that the next time someone I love is in danger, I can do more than watch. Silence. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving only crimson staining the sky. That's my answer, Jon said. It's not about being Arthur Dayne. It's not about revenge or glory or proving I'm worthy of anything. It's about them. Alia. Rob. Mei Ling. Everyone I've lost and everyone I might still lose. I want to be strong enough to keep them safe. That's all. That's everything. The silence stretched. Jon's heart pounded. He'd said everything he had laid himself bare in a way he'd never done before, not even with Mei Ling. If it wasn't enough, then it's not enough. And I'll find another way. Alternatively, I might end up dying in the process. But at least I told the truth. Feng turned. Slowly. Deliberately. His face was still unreadable, but something had changed. The dismissiveness was gone. In its place, assessment. Consideration. The look of someone weighing something precious on a scale. Most who come here want power for themselves. Revenge. Glory. The pleasure of being strong. He walked toward Jon, each step deliberate, and his footfall silent on the stone. They speak of protecting others, but beneath the words, they mean protecting their pride. Their legacy. Their image of themselves as heroes. He stopped an arm's length away. Those ancient eyes, black as deep water, studied Jon's face with an intensity that made Jon want to look away. He didn't. You mean what you say? It wasn't a question. Yes. You have lost people. Yes. And you will lose more. Strength does not prevent loss. It only changes its shape. I know. Do you? Truly. Jon met the old man's gaze. I watched Alia die. I couldn't save her. Strength wouldn't have changed that I was chained, and there were too many guards, and she was already dying. He paused. Breathed. But I also watched sailors drown because I couldn't pull them from the water fast enough. My hands cramped. My body failed. I survived because of the breathing techniques, and they died because I couldn't share that survival with them. Maybe strength can't prevent all loss. But it can prevent some. And some is more than none. Feng was silent for a long, measuring moment. The crimson light faded toward purple. The first stars appeared, pale and distant. Then. Come with me. Jon. They walked back together. Feng led. Jon followed. Neither spoke. The monastery was different in the evening light, lanterns flickering to life along the paths, monks moving to evening duties in their silent, rooted way. The smell of cooking drifted from somewhere distant. The mountain cold was settling in, raising gooseflesh on Jon's arms. Ji and Mei Ling waited in the courtyard where Jon had left them. Mei Ling's face was tight with anxiety, her hands clasped so hard her knuckles had gone white. Ji's composure was carefully neutral, but Jon saw the tension in his shoulders. They both straightened when Feng appeared. I will train him. Mei Ling's breath escaped in a rush. Xi's composure cracked just slightly into something like relief. Jon didn't react. He wasn't sure he believed it yet. But understand what the phrase means. Feng addressed Jon directly, his voice flat with warning. The bone-washing stage is painful beyond what you imagine. Your skeleton will be broken down and rebuilt from the marrow out. You will feel your bones burning inside your flesh. You will beg for it to stop. He paused, letting the words settle. Many quit. Many breaks. If you begin and fail, the damage may be worse than if you'd never started. Jon nodded. He'd expected this. Xi had warned him on the journey. Training begins tomorrow at dawn. You will remain at the monastery until bone washing is complete, 2 to 3 months, depending on how your body responds. During this time, no visitors. No letters. No distractions. The mind must be as focused as the body. He looked at Mei Ling. The girl leaves tonight. I could wait in the village below, Mei Ling said, her voice tight. I wouldn't interfere. No. Feng's voice was flat, final. If he knows you're waiting, he'll rush. He'll push through pain, he should rest through it. He'll damage himself trying to return to you faster. His gaze returned to Jon. The training requires isolation. Complete focus. Anything less, and you risk destroying what we're trying to build. When the first stage is complete, you may return to the fortress briefly. Then you'll come back for the next stage. This will be your life for years. Do you accept? Jon considered. Years. Isolation. Pain beyond imagining. No, Mei Ling. No letters. He was unable to communicate with anyone he held dear. This is what it costs. This is what strength requires. He looked at Mei Ling. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her chin was raised. Stubborn. Proud. She gave him the smallest nod. Do it. I accept. Something crossed Feng's face, not quite approval, but something close to it. Then say your goodbyes. The girl and the scholar leave at first light. Your old life ends tonight. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. Jon waited. The dead knight. Arthur Dane. The two swords. Jon's chest tightened. That path may still be open to you. When your foundation is strong, when your bones can bear the weight, you may return to it. A pause. But you must walk this path first. The internal path must come before the external one. Foundation before tower. Do you understand? Yes, Master Feng. Good. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we begin. He walked away silent as a shadow, solid as stone. Jon. Xi approached while Mei Ling hung back, composing herself. You did well. Better than I expected. I almost failed. Almost failing is not failing. Remember that. He gripped Jon's shoulder, a firm, fatherly gesture that reminded Jon, painfully, of Lord Stark. I'll send reports to General Kai. He'll want to know of your progress. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived the training. He released Jon's shoulder and stepped back. I'll give you two a moment. He moved toward the monastery's guest quarters, leaving Jon and Mei Ling alone in the lantern-lit courtyard. They faced each other in the flickering light. The distant sounds of monks chanting and wind through mountain peaks filled the silence between them. Mei Ling spoke first. 2 to 3 months. Yes. That's a long time. I know. No letters. No messages. Nothing. Feng says it's necessary. Feng is a mean old man, and I don't like him. Despite everything, Jon almost smiled. He's going to teach me. That's what matters. She was struggling. Jon could see it, the words she wanted to say, trapped behind the composure she was forcing. Her jaw was tight, her eyes too bright. Mei Ling. Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't say something kind. If you say something nice, I'll cry, and I would rather not cry in front of monks. Jon swallowed. He understood. He felt the same tightness in his throat, the same pressure behind his eyes. Do you remember what you're keeping for me? The twin swords. Arthur Dane's shadow. She nodded, not trusting her voice. When this is done, all of it, however long it takes, I'm coming back for them. And I'm going to show you what I can really do. You better. I promise. She drew a shaky breath. And I promise to practice my sword work while you're gone. So when you come back with your fancy bone training, I can still beat you. You've never beaten me. I've never seriously tried. You'll see. The banter was familiar. Safe. But beneath it, something else, something that had been growing between them since she'd found him on a beach, something neither of them had words for yet. She stepped forward without warning. Without hesitation. She wrapped her arms around him and held tight. She was fierce and desperate, just as she approached everything in her life. Jon froze for a moment. Physical contact still triggered wariness sometimes, the ghost of chains and guards and hands that meant harm. Then his arms came up to hold her back, and the wariness dissolved into something warmer. Don't die on some stupid mountain. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. I'll try not to. Try harder than that. I'll try as hard as I can. They held each other in the lantern light, two children who had found each other against impossible odds, about to be separated for the first time since the beach. Jon memorized the feel of her arms around him, the smell of her hair, and the way she fit against him like she'd been made to be there. Remember this, he told himself. When the pain comes, remember this. Jon. Yes. When you're in pain, when the training gets bad, remember that I'm waiting. I am waiting at the bottom of this stupid mountain. Annoyed at you for taking so long. I'll remember. Good. She stepped back. Her eyes were wet, but she hadn't let the tears fall. Pride. Stubbornness. The same fierce determination that had made her drag a half-dead foreign boy out of the sand and refuse to give up on him. I should go. Before I change my mind and refuse to leave. Feng would probably throw you off the mountain. I'd like to see him try. She would, too. That's what made it funny and frightening at once. She reached out one last time and touched the jade wolf pendant through his shirt. Keep this safe. It's supposed to bring you luck. I will. And keep yourself safe. That matters more than the luck. I know. She turned and walked away. Toward the guest quarters. Toward Ji. Toward the morning and the journey down the mountain. She didn't look back. Jon watched until she disappeared through a doorway. Then he was alone. Jon. The monk who led him to his cell was silent and efficient, the same grey robes, the same unhurried movements, the same utter lack of curiosity about the foreign boy who would be living among them. The cell was small. Stone walls, unadorned. A sleeping mat on the floor, thin but clean. A small towel and a basin of water are also present. A single narrow window showing a rectangle of star-filled sky. Nothing else. The dawn bell wakes you. Be in the eastern courtyard. The monk left. The door closed. Jon stood in the center of the room and let the silence settle over him. It was immense, that silence. Not empty, full. It was full of stone, age, and the weight of generations who had previously slept in this room. How many students had lain on that mat, staring at that window, wondering if they would survive what was coming. This apartment is where I'll live for months. This small space. The walls are stark and unadorned. No, Mei Ling. No, Ji. No garden. Just me and the training and whatever Pain Feng has planned. He moved. Unpacked his meager belongings. There was almost nothing to unpack. The jade wolf pendant went under the sleeping mat, positioned where his heart would rest when he lay down. He washed his face in the basin. The water was cold. Mountain-fed. He sat on the mat, cross-legged, and tried to find stillness. What am I leaving behind? What am I leaving behind? The fortress, the safety, and the comfort. I am leaving behind Mei Ling's presence. Her voice. Her hand was clasped in his. Master Ji's lessons. The garden. The familiar. The twin swords wait for him at the bottom of the world. What am I carrying? His body, damaged but still fighting. Marcus's memories, fragmented but present. The breathing techniques are dangerous but powerful. A jade wolf is present. A promise. A purpose. What am I becoming? He didn't know. That was the point. The boy who washed up on a beach is going to die in this room. Something else will be born. Jon lay down on the thin mat. The floor was hard beneath him. His body ached from the journey, from the emotional weight of everything that had happened. But the window showed stars. These are the same stars that shone over Westeros. Over Winterfell. Over wherever Robb was sleeping tonight. We're under the same sky. That has to mean something. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the pain would begin. Feng had promised he would beg for it to stop. I've begged before. In the slave pits, when they broke my fingers. In the storm, when the sea tried to swallow me. I begged, and I survived anyway. I can beg again. I can hurt again. I can break again. I will continue to rise as long as I keep getting back up. The faces came to him in the darkness behind his eyes. Alia, telling him to be free. Robb, calling him brother. Mei Ling is seen holding his hand in the darkness. For you. All of this is for you. Wait for me. Sleep came slowly. His mind didn't want to quiet, it kept circling back to Mei Ling's embrace, Feng's warning, and the pain that was coming. But exhaustion won eventually, the way it always did. Somewhere below the mountain, Mei Ling lay awake in a guest room, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. In a few hours, she would ride down the mountain with Ji, carrying a bundle of wooden swords and a heart full of worry. She's waiting for me, Jon thought, the words growing soft and distant as sleep pulled him under. They're all waiting. Don't let them down. Sleep took him at last, deep and dreamless, the last peaceful rest he would know for months. Outside his window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the boy below. The mountain stood as it had stood for millennia, patient and cold. And in the silence of the monastery, where generations of students had suffered and transformed, Jon Snow began the long process of becoming someone new. The old life was over. The new one had not yet begun. In between, there was only the waiting, and the stars, and the quiet certainty that everything was about to change. Chapter 12, The Bone Washing Part 1. Jon. A sound like iron striking iron, sharp, pure, and impossible to ignore. Jon's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling was wrong grey stone instead of plastered wood. The bed was too hard, a thin mat on an unforgiving floor. The air smelled of cold and age and something he couldn't name. The monastery. The stone tiger. The training. The bell continued, 3 long tones that echoed off the mountain peaks and faded into silence. Each strike seemed to vibrate in Jon's chest, as if the sound was designed to reach not just his ears but his bones. Grey light seeped through the narrow window. Dawn had barely broken, the sky outside still more purple than blue. Jon's body ached from the journey, from the thin mat, and from sleeping in a position that favored his damaged ribs. His right hand was stiff from the mountain cold, the fingers that had been broken slow to respond when he tried to flex them. The eastern courtyard. Be there when the bell sounds. He rose. His joints protested, crackling like dry wood. The jade wolf pendant had worked its way around during the night. He straightened it against his chest, feeling its cool weight settle over his heart. This is the last morning I'll feel like this, he thought as he pulled on his clothes. Tomorrow, everything will hurt more. The eastern courtyard was smaller than the main one, more enclosed, with high walls that blocked the mountain wind. Jon's breath fogged in the cold air as he entered, his eyes adjusting to the grey half-light. A large stone basin dominated the center of the space, filled with water that steamed gently despite the chill. The smell was strange herbs and minerals and something almost metallic, sharp enough to make Jon's nose wrinkle. Master Feng stood motionless beside the basin. Two monks Jon didn't recognize flanked him, their grey robes identical, their expressions as blank as carved stone. No one else was present. No audience for whatever was about to happen. "You're late." Jon blinked. He wasn't late, he'd come the moment the bell stopped ringing and had practically run from his cell to reach the courtyard. "The bell is the warning," Feng said, his voice flat. "When it sounds, you should already be here." The first lesson, Jon realized. Everything here is a test. Tomorrow, you will be on time. Today, we begin. Feng circled the basin slowly, his footsteps silent on the stone. Steam curled around him like living things, parting and reforming as he moved. The bone washing cleanses the skeleton of old damage, impurities, weakness. His black eyes found Jon's. "The bones you have now are the bones of a slave, broken, poorly healed, and full of the memory of pain." He stopped circling. "We will burn that memory out." Jon said nothing. There was nothing to say. Each morning, the basin. The water is infused with 17 herbs and 3 mineral compounds. It will feel like fire. That is because it is fire that seeps through flesh to reach bone. Feng gestured to one of the monks, who produced a wooden paddle and stirred the steaming water. Each afternoon, exercises. Movements designed to stress every part of your skeleton. Controlled damage. The body rebuilds what is damaged, stronger than before. Each evening, meditation. The mind must guide the body's healing. Without focus, the pain is merely pain. With focus, it becomes transformation. He stopped in front of Jon, close enough that Jon could see the individual threads of grey in his thin beard. "The first week is the worst. Your body will fight what we're doing. It will beg you to stop. Many students quit in the first week." A pause. "You will not quit. Or you will, and you will leave this mountain having wasted both our time. The choice is yours. It is always yours." The two monks approached. One gestured for Jon to remove his clothes. The other continued stirring the basin, the paddle cutting slow circles through the steaming water. Jon hesitated. The steam rising from the basin had an acrid quality, not the gentle warmth of a hot spring, but something sharper. Something that warned of pain to come. "The water will not harm your skin," Feng said, reading his hesitation. "Only what lies beneath." Jon stripped. The cold air raised gooseflesh across his arms and legs, his chest, and his back. The monk's eyes passed over his scars, the harpy brand, the whip marks, the shipwreck damage, without reaction. They'd seen worse, probably. Or they'd learned not to see at all. He walked to the basin's edge. The steam enveloped him, warm and strange smelling, carrying hints of the 17 herbs and 3 mineral compounds that would soon be burning through his flesh. "This is what I came for. This is the path." Jon stepped into the water. The heat was immediate, painfully hot, but bearable. He forced himself to sink lower, bending his knees, letting the water rise up his thighs, his waist, and his chest. The basin was deeper than it looked. By the time he was sitting on the stone bottom, the water reached his shoulders, lapping at his collarbone with each breath. "This isn't so bad," he thought. "I can handle this." Then the herbs began to work. The pain didn't come all at once. It seeped. Like the water was soaking through his skin, through his muscle, finding his bones, and burning them from the inside. His fingers, first the damaged ones, the ones that had been broken in Grazdan's compound and rebuilt by Master Ji. Fire in the joints. Fire in the marrow. A deep, impossible heat that no water should be able to create. Then his ribs. The old fractures lit up like someone was tracing them with hot iron, each break site announcing itself with a flare of agony. Then his spine, his shoulders, his ankles, every place where damage hid, every weakness in his skeleton, burning. Jon's hands gripped the basin's edge. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth creaked. Don't scream. Don't scream. Don't. Breathe. Feng's voice cut through the pain. Not your technique, just breathe. The pain is information. Listen to it. Jon breathed. In through his nose, out through his mouth, the way Ji had taught him during meditation. The pain didn't lessen. But he found a space inside himself where he could observe it without drowning. A place where the fire was something happening to him rather than something consuming him. This is just the first morning. This is just the beginning. The water swirled around his fingers, turning faintly pink, not with blood but with something else. Old damage being drawn out. Old weakness being purged. The color spread in spiraling patterns, carried by currents Jon couldn't feel. He watched it swirl and tried to believe this was healing, not destruction. Jon. The days blurred together. Every day was the same: dawn bell, basin, morning recovery, midday exercises, afternoon rest, evening meditation, sleepless night. The schedule became a rhythm, a heartbeat that Jon measured his existence against. The monastery's other rhythms revealed themselves slowly. The bells that marked each hour different tones for different purposes, a language Jon was learning to understand. The monks moved through their duties in silence, their grey robes making them almost interchangeable. The meals delivered to his cell were always the same: broth, rice, and bitter herbs designed for healing rather than pleasure. No one spoke to him except Feng. No one acknowledged him except when training demanded it. He was alone in a crowd of grey-robed figures who treated him like furniture. Feng's exercises were unlike anything Jon had experienced. No weapons. No combat forms. No movement at all, really just positions. Stances were held until muscles screamed and then held longer. Movements so slow they barely qualified as movement. External arts train muscle, Feng explained during one session, circling Jon as he struggled to maintain a one-legged stance. Internal arts train structure. You will hold this position until your bones understand their proper alignment. Jon's standing leg burned. His extended leg trembled. His arms spread wide for balance felt like they were being slowly torn from their sockets. But beneath the muscle pain, something else emerged. A sense of his skeleton as a structure, as a framework. The way his bones connected and supported each other. The places where that support was weak, where old breaks had healed wrong, where damage had created gaps in the architecture of his body. You feel it, Feng said, watching. The gaps. The weaknesses. Good. Now we fill them. The nights were the hardest. After evening meditation, Jon returned to his small cell and collapsed onto the thin mat. Everything hurt. His bones ached with a deep, persistent throb that no position could ease. His muscles were exhausted from holding poses they weren't designed to hold. His mind was foggy from the intensity of concentration the meditation required. And the loneliness. No Mei Ling to talk to. No garden to sit in. No Ji to offer wisdom or distraction. Just stone walls, starlight through a narrow window, and the sound of his own breathing. He thought of her constantly. Her face when she said goodbye. The fierce hug. The jade wolf she'd told him to keep safe. Sometimes he caught himself talking to the pendant at night, whispering to it as if she could hear. I'm still here. It hurts, but I'm still here. Are you thinking about me too? At the bottom of this mountain, in some village inn, annoyed that you had to leave? I hope you're not too worried. I hope you're practicing your sword work like you promised. I miss you. The pendant never answered. But holding it helped, somehow. Made the stone walls feel less like a prison. By the 7th day, Jon's body was a landscape of suffering. His fingers throbbed constantly. The bone washing was targeting his old breaks with particular intensity, as if the herbs could sense where the damage was deepest. The joints were swollen, discolored, and painful to bend. His ribs felt like they were being slowly crushed. Each breath was a negotiation between the need for air and the cost of expanding his chest. His damaged, scarred lungs ached even when he wasn't breathing deeply. The exercises required focus, and focus required breath control, and breath control required lungs that worked properly. His didn't. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by waves of bone-deep pain. He'd drift off from exhaustion, dream of drowning or burning or both, then jerk awake with his heart pounding and his bones screaming. At the end of the 7th day, Feng examined Jon's hands. His fingers were gentle, the same gentle, immovable grip he'd used during Jon's first assessment, but even gentle pressure sent spikes of pain through Jon's joints. The old breaks are responding, Feng said, turning Jon's hand over in his own. I can feel the bone softening, preparing to reshape. Is that good? It's progress. The first stage of bone washing breaks down what was. The second stage will build what will be. How long until the second stage? When you're ready. It wasn't an answer. Jon was learning that Feng rarely gave answers, only observations. Questions were things you answered yourself, through practice and pain and time. Jon. On the 8th day, the monks added something new to the basin. Jon noticed the change immediately. The water was a deeper color, amber instead of clear, and the smell had sharpened from acrid to almost unbearable. The steam stung his eyes when he approached. Your body has adjusted to the first formula, Feng explained, standing in his usual position beside the basin. We must go deeper. Jon stepped into the water. The pain doubled. His entire skeleton felt like it was dissolving. The burning reached places he didn't know could hurt: the small bones of his feet, the vertebrae of his spine, and the delicate structure of his inner ear. Every part of him that contained bone, which was every part of him, was on fire. He didn't scream. But it was close. Closer than it had been. Closer every day. The body's rebellion began on the 9th day. Jon's appetite disappeared first. Food, the bland broth and rice that was all the monastery served, tasted like ash. His stomach rebelled against everything, cramping and churning even when he forced himself to eat. His hands shook constantly now, not just the damaged right one. A fine tremor that made holding chopsticks difficult and that made the meditation exercises almost impossible. His sleep was filled with fever dreams, formless and frightening, full of drowning and burning and voices he almost recognized calling his name. On the 10th day, he vomited after the morning bath. His body was trying to purge what it couldn't endure, rejecting the healing that felt like destruction. Feng watched him retch into a drainage gutter, his expression unchanged. The body fights change. This is natural. The question is whether your will is stronger than your body's fear. Jon wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. And if it isn't? Then you leave. That is always an option. It didn't sound like judgment. It sounded like fact. The 11th night was when the doubts came. Jon lay on his thin mat, staring at the rectangle of stars through his window, and allowed himself to think what he'd been refusing to think. What if I can't do this? What if Feng was right the first time? I'm too damaged, too broken, too weak. What if I'm destroying what's left of my body for nothing? He looked at his hands in the moonlight. They were trembling, as they always were now. But the fingers that had been broken looked wrong, somehow swollen, discolored, the joints thick and strange. As if the bone washing was making them worse before it made them better. If this doesn't work, I might not be able to hold a sword at all. I might leave this mountain more crippled than I arrived. The thought was terrifying. More terrifying than the pain, somehow. Pain ended eventually. Failure was forever. On the 12th night, Jon found himself composing a letter to Mei Ling in his head. Dear Mei Ling, I don't know if I can do this. The pain is worse than anything I've felt, worse than the slave pits, worse than the storm. My bones feel like they're on fire all the time. I can't sleep. I can barely eat. The monks look at me like I'm already failing. I think about quitting every day. Every hour. Every minute I'm in that basin. I miss you. I miss the garden. I miss being someone instead of something, being broken down. I don't know if I'm strong enough. He couldn't send it. Feng had forbidden letters. And even if he could, what would be the point? She couldn't help him. No one could. This was his path. He walked it alone or not at all. Jon. The 14th day was the worst yet. The morning bath left Jon shaking so badly he could barely walk. His bones felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. The monks had to help him out of the basin, their hands under his arms, their faces as blank as ever. The exercises were agony. Every position Feng demanded stressed the parts of Jon that hurt most. His ribs screamed when he twisted. His fingers couldn't grip. His legs trembled under his own weight. Hold, Feng said, watching Jon struggle to maintain a stance. I can't. Hold. Jon held. For 30 seconds. A minute. An eternity. When he finally collapsed, Feng said nothing. Just walked away, leaving Jon on the cold stone floor. The evening meditation was a blur. Jon sat in the lotus position and tried to focus, tried to guide his mind the way Feng had taught him, but the pain was too loud. It drowned out everything else: thought, memory, hope. When he finally reached his cell, he collapsed onto the mat and didn't move. I can't do this. The thought wasn't dramatic. Wasn't anguished. Just fact, clear and cold as the mountain air. I can't do this. It's too much. I'm not strong enough. His mind built the case. Feng said I could leave. It's always an option. That's what he said. If I leave now, maybe I can recover. Maybe the damage isn't permanent yet. Maybe I can find another way. Mei Ling wouldn't want me to destroy myself. She'd want me to survive. Surviving is what I'm good at. I can survive this by walking away. The logic was sound. The logic was seductive. The logic offered escape from the burning in his bones, from the isolation, and from the endless cycle of pain without visible progress. Somewhere in his memory, Alya's voice whispered, "Be free." But what was freedom? Escaping this pain? Or becoming strong enough that nothing could chain him again? He didn't know anymore. The pain had burned away his certainty. The memory came unbidden. Not a flashback, not the drowning terror of trauma. Just a memory, clear and sharp. The training yard at Tianli Fortress. 3 seconds of impossible movement. The twin swords were blurring in his hands, cutting patterns in the air like something from a dream. For one moment, one perfect, impossible moment, he had been Arthur Dane. Then his body broke. He fell. He failed. But he remembered the feeling. The power flowing through him, the swords as extensions of his will, the certainty that in that moment he could have faced anything. He remembered Mei Ling's face afterward, terrified, yes, but also determined. Refusing to leave him. Refusing to let him lie there alone in his failure. He remembered Sun Cao's face, shocked, yes, but also something like respect. As if the older boy had seen something in Jon's 3 seconds of glory that mattered more than his collapse. He remembered Ji's diagnosis: "You're damaged. Not crippled." There's a difference. Is there a difference? Or was that just comfort for a dying dream? Jon lay in the dark, his bones burning, and had no answer. He could get up right now. Walk out of this cell. Find Feng and tell him he is done. The path down the mountain would be cool and quiet. No more basins. No more fire in his bones. No more isolation. Mei Ling is waiting. I could see her tomorrow if I left tonight. He sat up. His body screamed at the movement, every bone in his skeleton protesting. He looked at the door. I could leave. Right now. This moment. No one would stop him. That was what Feng had said. The choice was always his. Always. His hand found the jade wolf pendant. Cool stone against his palm. Her gift. Her promise. The weight of it was familiar now, comforting in ways he couldn't explain. He remembered what he'd told her in the garden, when he'd given her the twin swords to keep. When this is done, all of it, however long it takes, I'm coming back for them. And I'm going to show you what I can really do. The twin swords. Wrapped in silk. Waiting for him. If I leave now, I will never get them back. Not because she wouldn't give them, because I wouldn't deserve them. If I leave now, I stay broken forever. Jon didn't get up. Didn't walk to the door. Didn't quit. He lay back down, clutching the pendant, and stared at the rectangle of stars through his window. One more day, he told himself. Just survive one more day. Tomorrow I can decide again. But tonight, I stay. The pain didn't lessen. The doubts didn't disappear. But Jon Snow had survived worse nights than this. Nights in slave pits, in storm-tossed seas, and in the long, cold darkness of running alone through a world that wanted him dead. He could survive this night too. He closed his eyes and waited for dawn. Sleep came eventually, not peaceful sleep, not restful sleep, but the exhausted surrender of a body that couldn't stay conscious any longer. Dreams swirled through his mind, formless and dark. Drowning dreams. Burning dreams. He dreamed of Mei Ling's face floating above him, her distant voice calling his name. Jon. Jon. Wake up. You have to wake up. But he was awake, wasn't he? He was awake and lying on a thin mat in a stone cell, with his bones burning and his will being the only thing holding him together. The stars wheeled outside his window, indifferent to his suffering. The mountain stood as it had stood for millennia, patient and cold. And somewhere in the monastery, Master Feng Huang slept or meditated or simply waited to see if the Western boy would still be there when dawn came. Jon would be there. Broken, burning, barely holding on, but there. He would be there for one more day. Chapter 13, The Bone Washing Part 2. Jon. The bell sounded. 3 iron tones, same as every morning. Jon opened his eyes. His body was a map of pain, bones throbbing, muscles aching, exhaustion pressing down like a physical weight. The thin mat beneath him felt like stone. The cold mountain air scraped at his lungs with each breath. But he was still here. Something had changed. Not the pain was the same. Not the exhaustion that was worse, if anything. What had changed was simpler, quieter, the question was answered. Last night, he'd faced the choice. Stay or leave. Continue or quit. He'd chosen to stay. This morning, he didn't have to choose again. The choosing was done. All that remained was the work. We are taking things one day at a time. That's all. Just today. Jon rose. His joints protested, crackling like dry kindling. He dressed in the simple clothes the monastery provided, rough spun, practical, and designed for training rather than comfort. The jade wolf pendant settled against his chest as he straightened his collar, cool and familiar. He walked to the eastern courtyard. The dawn bell was still fading when he arrived on time, for once. Perhaps early. Feng's eyes flickered with something that might have been acknowledgement, though his face remained as unreadable as ever. The basin steamed. The amber water waited. The 2 monks stood in their usual positions, silent as statues. Jon didn't hesitate. Didn't brace himself. Just stepped forward and descended into the water. The fire was the same. The burning in his bones, the agony seeping through flesh to skeleton, the sense of being dissolved from the inside out. Nothing had changed about the pain itself. But Jon's relationship to it had shifted. This is what healing feels like, he told himself as the fire spread through him. The pain is burning away what was broken. Let it burn. He sank deeper into the water, letting it close over his shoulders and his neck until only his head remained above the surface. The heat pulsed through him in waves, finding every damaged place, every weakness in his skeleton. His fingers. His ribs. His spine. Let it burn. When Jon climbed out of the basin, trembling, barely able to stand, Feng was watching him with an expression Jon couldn't read. Something is different today. Jon looked up, water dripping from his white hair, his body shaking with exhaustion. He didn't know what to say. Yesterday, you endured. Today, you accept. A pause. That is the first step. It wasn't praise. Feng didn't give praise. But it was acknowledgement. Recognition that something had shifted in the night, in the choice that Jon had made in the darkness of his cell. Jon nodded. He was too exhausted for words. But somewhere beneath the pain, something unfamiliar stirred. Hope. Jon. The pain didn't lessen. But it changed. The first 2 weeks had felt like destruction, his bones being dissolved, melted, unmade. The fire had burned without purpose, or at least without purpose that Jon could perceive. Each morning in the basin had been an exercise in pure endurance, surviving long enough for the monks to pull him out. Now, something different. The fire still burned. But beneath it, a sense of building. Something was taking shape where nothing had been before. Jon noticed it first in his fingers. The damaged right hand, the one that had failed him in the training yard, that had cramped and seized and betrayed him at the worst possible moment, felt different. The joints moved more smoothly when he flexed them. The grip was steadier when he clenched his fist. It still hurt. But it hurt like growth, not like breaking. During an exercise session in the 3rd week, Jon held a stance, one leg raised, the other planted, arms extended for balance. His muscles screamed. His bones ached. The position was designed to stress every weakness in his skeleton, and it was working. But he held. You have questions, Feng said, circling him slowly. It wasn't a question. The pain is different now. Why? Because you are different. Feng's footsteps were silent on the stone, each one deliberate and precise. The first stage of bone washing destroys old damage, old patterns, old weakness. Your body fought because it didn't understand. And now your body is beginning to understand. It feels like a new structure is forming. The marrow is responding. The bones are rebuilding according to proper design instead of trauma's accidents. Jon's standing leg trembled. His balance wavered. But he held. A field must be cleared before new crops can grow, Feng continued. The clearing is violent burning, uprooting, destruction. But it serves the planting. He stopped in front of Jon, those black eyes studying him with their usual unreadable intensity. You have finished clearing. Now we plant. The exercises changed. Feng introduced different movements, still slow, still focused on structure rather than strength, but with a different character. Instead of positions that stressed weaknesses, positions that reinforced proper alignment. Instead of controlled damage, controlled rebuilding. Jon's body learned to move in new ways. With awareness of every bone, every joint, and every connection between one part and another. The exercises were still difficult, his body wasn't used to this kind of precision, this internal focus, but there was something almost pleasant in them. Like stretching a muscle that had been cramped too long. Like finding a posture his body was always meant to hold but had never learned. On the 30th day, Feng examined Jon's hands. His fingers probed the bones with the same gentle, immovable grip he'd used during Jon's first assessment. Each joint, each connection, each place where damage had once lived. The second finger. Make a fist. Jon did. The finger that had been most damaged, the one the guards had broken twice in Grazdan's compound, the one that had never moved right since curled properly for the first time in years. Again. Harder. Jon squeezed. Hard. Jon's squeeze was more intense than anything he had experienced before the slave pits and everything that had broken him. No cramp. No pain. Just strength. The finger is rebuilding correctly, Feng said, releasing Jon's hand. 2 more weeks, perhaps 3, and it will be stronger than it was before it was ever broken. Jon stared at his hand. The tremor that had plagued him for months gone. The weakness that had betrayed him in the training yard was fading. It's working. It's actually working. Jon. The bones of his hands were the most obviously damaged, but not the most limiting. That distinction belonged to his ribs. The old fractures from the storm, from Yunkai, from all the violence his young body had endured had been holding him back since before he reached GTI. Every deep breath reminded him of breaks that never healed right. Every rotation of his torso pulled at scar tissue that shouldn't be there. Every time he'd tried to use his breathing techniques at full power, his ribs had screamed in protest. Jon noticed the change during meditation in the 6th week. He was focusing on his breathing, not the enhanced breathing of his techniques, just normal breath, in and out, when he realized something was different. He was breathing deeper than he had in years. His ribs were expanding fully, without pain, without the familiar catch of damaged bone grinding against damaged bone. Air filled his lungs in a way it hadn't since before the storm, since before the slave pits, since before everything. The ribs, he thought, amazement cutting through his meditative calm. Feng is fixing my ribs. That night, alone in his cell, Jon experimented. He tried movements that used to hurt, twisting his torso, reaching across his body, and the rotational patterns that dual sword fighting required. The movements that had destroyed him in the training yard, that had cracked his ribs again, and that had triggered the flashback that ended his demonstration. There was still discomfort. The healing wasn't complete. But the sharp, grinding pain was gone, replaced by something duller, something that felt like it was fading rather than permanent. If my ribs heal properly, if they rebuild the way Feng says, then maybe. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Not yet. It was too fragile, too precious. But the image came anyway, 2 swords in his hands, moving through forms without his body betraying him. 3 seconds of glory that didn't end in collapse. Maybe. During evening meditation, Feng spoke more than usual. The golden marrow art is not merely physical, he said, his voice quiet in the mountain stillness. The body and mind are not separate, they are aspects of one thing. What happens to bone affects thought. What happens to thought affects bones. Jon sat in the lotus position, his breathing steady, his focus split between Feng's words and his own internal awareness. I don't understand. Your bones carry memory. The breaks you suffered, they left marks not just in calcium and marrow, but in how you hold yourself. How did you expect to be hurt? How do you flinch before the blow comes? Jon thought of the training yard. The moment his hand cramped. The flashback that had followed, not to Yunkai, but to Winterfell. To the moment he'd first revealed his strangeness and seen fear in the eyes of people who should have loved him. The bone washing cleanses both, Feng continued. As your skeleton rebuilds, the memories of damage fade. You will stand differently. Move differently. Think differently. I'll forget what happened to me. No. You will remember. But the memory will not live in your bones anymore. It will be something you know, not something you are. Jon considered this. The brand on his shoulder. The scars on his back. The phantom pain of guards breaking his fingers while they laughed. Something I know, not something I am. Was that possible? Could healing go that deep? Somewhere around the 40th day, the monks began to acknowledge Jon differently. Not dramatically, they were monks, after all, trained in silence and stillness. But small things. A nod when he passed in the corridor. A hand steadying his arm after a particularly difficult exercise. A cup of tea left outside his cell door on a cold morning, still steaming. Jon realized what it meant. They weren't ignoring him before out of cruelty. They were waiting to see if he would survive. Now that he was clearly going to complete the bone washing, he existed to them. He was no longer a temporary presence, a student who might vanish any morning. He was one of them. Or close enough. Jon. The 58th day dawned clear and cold. Jon knew before the bell sounded that something was different. The light through his window had a particular quality, golden rather than grey, and the air smelled of pine and something else, something that might have been incense from the monastery's shrine. He walked to the eastern courtyard and found the basin already prepared. But the water was different today. Clearer. The smell is less acrid. The steam rising from the surface was gentle rather than harsh. The final formula, Feng explained, standing in his usual position. It seals what has been rebuilt. Completes the first stage. Jon stepped into the water. The fire was muted now, a warmth rather than a burning. He sank into it and felt it soaking through him, not destroying but finishing. Polishing. Completing. He was like a craftsman putting the finishing touches on a piece of work that had taken months to create. He stayed longer than usual. Let the warmth penetrate every part of him. Let it seal the changes that the bone washing had wrought. When he finally emerged, his body felt different in ways he couldn't articulate. Solid, he thought, standing in the cold morning air as water dripped from his skin. I feel solid. Like my bones are actually holding me up instead of barely keeping me together. Feng's examination was the most thorough yet. He tested every joint, probed every bone, and had Jon move through a series of positions that stressed different parts of his skeleton. Each movement was assessed, each connection evaluated. The examination took nearly an hour. Finally, Feng stepped back. The bone washing is complete. Jon waited. There was always more with Feng. Your skeleton has been cleansed and rebuilt. The old damage is gone, not hidden, not compensated for, but gone. Your bones are now as they should have been had you never been hurt. He paused. In some ways, better. The rebuilding has made them denser. Stronger. Your skeleton is now the skeleton of someone who has trained in the internal arts for years, not months. Jon looked at his hands. The fingers that had been broken in Grazdan's compound, that had cramped and failed him in the training yard, they were straight now. Strong. The tremor that had plagued him was gone. Does that mean I can use the breathing techniques again? Without breaking? Not yet. The foundation is laid, but the structure is incomplete. Stage 2 marrow refinement will strengthen what we have built. That will take longer. Many months. But I can return to the fortress? You said. Yes. You may return briefly. See your friends. Rest in familiar surroundings. A pause. Then you will come back, and we will continue. Feng walked with Jon to the monastery gate, something he'd never done before. The morning sun was bright, the sky a deep blue that seemed to go on forever. Below them, the mountain fell away in stages, forest, then farmland, then the distant glitter of the sea. You surprised me. Jon looked at the old master, uncertain how to respond. When you arrived, I saw a boy chasing a dead man's legend. I expected you to quit in the first week. I almost did. I know. The 14th night. Feng's eyes were unreadable, black as deep water. I watched your window. I saw the light stay on. I saw you not leave. He had been watching. He had seen everything. Why didn't you say anything? Because the choice had to be yours. It always has to be yours. They stood in silence for a moment, master and student, looking out at the world below. You chose correctly, Feng said finally. That tells me something about who you are. It was the closest Feng had come to praise. Jon felt it like warmth in his chest, spreading outward. Thank you, Master Feng. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. The work was yours. The pain was yours. The choice was yours. I'll come back. After I see them. I know you will. Jon. The monastery gate closed behind him, and Jon began the descent. The mountain air was the same thin, cold, sharp with pine, but he experienced it differently now. His lungs expanded fully, drinking in the air without the familiar catch of damaged ribs. His legs carried him down the stone steps without the bone-deep ache he'd carried since the storm. I'm different, he realized, moving down the path that had nearly broken him 2 months ago. The same person, but different. Stronger. He traveled alone. There is no Ji to offer wisdom and quiet company. No more Mei Ling to fill silences with chatter and laughter. Just Jon and the mountain road and the slow descent back to the world he'd left behind. He used the time to think. To process. He sought to comprehend the transformation he had undergone. His fingers, healed. Strong. They were flexible in ways they hadn't been since before Yunkai. He flexed them as he walked, marveling at the smooth movements and the lack of pain. His ribs, rebuilt. Solid. No longer a cage of pain around his lungs. He breathed deep, filling his chest completely, and felt no protest from bones that had once ground against each other with every breath. His spine, aligned. The constant low ache that he'd stopped noticing because it was always there gone. His posture was different now, straighter, more centered. His body, not perfect. Not unbreakable. But functional in ways it hadn't been since before the slave pits. Maybe since forever. This is what Ji meant, Jon thought. Damaged, not crippled. And now, maybe not even damaged anymore. The fortress emerged from the distance on the 3rd day of travel. Grey stone and curved roofs, military banners snapping in the wind. Tianli. The place that had become home without Jon quite realizing it. His pace quickened without conscious thought. Mei Ling. 2 months without seeing her. Without hearing her voice. Without anyone who cared whether he lived or died except in the abstract sense of a student's progress. She'd been waiting. Like she promised. I hope she hasn't been too annoyed. The thought made him smile, his first real smile in 2 months. The guards at the gate recognized him, but only barely. They looked twice, uncertain if the boy approaching was really the foreign student who'd left 2 months ago. Jon Snow? Back from the mountain? Yes. He hesitated. Is Mei Ling here? The guard grinned, the first genuine smile Jon had seen since leaving the monastery. She's been asking every messenger that comes through. Made us promise to send word the moment you appeared. Don't send word. The guard raised an eyebrow. I want to surprise her. The guard's grin widened. The garden, most likely. She spends a lot of time there. Jon walked through the gate into the fortress that had almost faded from his memory during the endless days of pain and isolation. The garden was ahead. Their garden. The bench where she'd given him the jade wolf. The trees where cherry blossoms had fallen like pink snow. He touched the pendant through his shirt. Cool stone against his palm. Her gift. Her promise. I'm back. I have fulfilled my promise. Now let me show you what I've become. The garden was quiet in the afternoon light. Jon approached through the side entrance, the one he and Mei Ling had used when they wanted to avoid servants and formalities. The path was familiar, worn smooth by their footsteps over months of shared meals and conversations and comfortable silences. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. She was there. Sitting on their bench, a book open in her lap. Her dark hair was longer than he remembered, pulled back in a simple braid. She wore the practical clothes she preferred, not the fine silks her station demanded, but something comfortable, something real. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her attention was on the book, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked older somehow, though it had only been 2 months. Or maybe Jon was just seeing her differently after so long without seeing her at all. His throat tightened. I made it. I survived. I came back. I fulfilled my promise. He stepped into the clearing. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved. She stared at him, taking in the changes, maybe, or simply unable to believe he was really there. Her book slipped from her fingers, forgotten. Jon. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm back. She was off the bench and running toward him before he could say anything else. She hit him hard enough to stagger him, which wouldn't have been possible 2 months ago, when his ribs were still a cage of pain and her arms wrapped around him with fierce, desperate strength. You idiot, she said into his chest. You absolute idiot. She had gone 2 months without receiving a single letter. There had been no communication at all. Do you know how worried I was? Feng said no letters. I don't care what Feng said. I was going to climb that mountain myself if you didn't come back soon. Jon held her. His arms came up automatically, wrapping around her shoulders, pulling her close. She smelled like the garden, like cherry blossoms and summer grass and home. I missed you, he said quietly. You better have missed me. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, her eyes bright with tears she was refusing to let fall. I've been practicing my sword work every day. Just like I promised. So don't think you can impress me with whatever fancy bone training you. She stopped. She observed him more intently. You're different. I know. You're standing differently. Taller. And your eyes? What about my eyes? They're the same. She smiled, finally the smile he'd been carrying in his memory through 2 months of pain. That's good. I was worried you'd come back a stranger. I'm still me. I know. That's what I mean. She stepped back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, pretending she hadn't almost cried, because she was mailing, and crying in front of people wasn't something she did. So, she said, her voice steadying. Are you going to show me what you learned, or do I have to beat it out of you? Jon laughed. The sound surprised him, rusty from disuse but genuine. Let me rest first. I just walked down a mountain. Fine. But tomorrow, I want to see everything. She grabbed his hand, his right hand, the one that had been damaged and squeezed. Your hand feels different. It is different. Stronger. Yes. Her smile widened. Good. You'll need it when I beat you in our sparring match. You've never beaten me. I've never seriously tried. Tomorrow, I try. Jon let her pull him toward the fortress, toward food and rest and familiar faces. The garden fell away behind them, but he knew he'd be back. They'd sit on their bench again, in the place where she'd given him the jade wolf and he'd given her the twin swords. The twin swords. They're still waiting, he thought. Wrapped in silk. They were prepared to welcome me. However, the process is not yet complete. The first step is stage 2. Marrow refinement. I have more months of training ahead of me. And then someday I'll show her what Arthur Dane looked like. For now, this was enough. Mei Ling's hand in his. The fortress walls around them. He was filled with the knowledge that he had survived, grown, and returned. He has successfully completed one step. There is still one more step to complete. But today, I'm home. Chapter 14, The Return Part 1. Jon. The fortress hadn't changed. The same grey stone walls rose against the afternoon sky. The same curved roofs caught the sunlight. The same military banners snapped in the wind, bearing General Kai's colors. Even the guards at the gate were the same faces, the same postures, the same slight wariness when they looked at Jon's white hair. But Jon had changed, and that made everything different. He moved through the fortress like a ghost, avoiding the main paths. He'd asked the guards not to announce him and had asked them to keep his arrival quiet. He wanted to see her before she saw him just for a moment. To prepare himself. 2 months. What if she's different? What if I'm different in ways she doesn't like? The garden came into view through the familiar gate. The same trees, heavy with late summer leaves. The same stone paths, worn smooth by countless feet. The same bench where they'd sat together on his last night, where she'd held his hand and promised to wait. She was there. Mei Ling sat on their bench, a book open in her lap. She wasn't reading, her eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing, the book forgotten. Her dark hair was longer than he remembered, pulled back in a simple braid that fell past her shoulders. She looked older. Not dramatically, it had only been 2 months, but something had shifted in her face. The last softness of childhood had begun to give way to something sharper, more defined. She would be 12 soon. Growing up while he was gone. Jon stood in the gateway, watching her. His heart was pounding harder than it had during any of Feng's exercises. Say something. Move. Do something. He couldn't. He was frozen, overwhelmed by the simple fact of her presence after so long without it. 2 months of silence. 2 months of pain and isolation and nothing but stone walls and his own thoughts for company. And now here she was, 10 paces away, close enough to touch. Some instinct made her look up. Her eyes found his across the garden, wide, startled, and disbelieving. The book slipped from her fingers, forgotten before it hit the ground. Jon. Her voice cracked at his name. I'm back. She was off the bench before the words finished leaving his mouth. Running across the garden, sandals slapping against stone, not caring about dignity or composure or anything except reaching him. Jon braced himself. She hit him like a small storm, arms wrapping around him, face pressed against his chest. She was taller than she'd been. Her head reached his chin now, where before it had barely reached his shoulder. You're back. You're actually back. I promised. You took too long. Feng said 2 to 3 months. It was 2 months. That's 2 months too long. Jon held her. His arms worked properly now, no cramps, no weakness, no trembling. He could hold her as tight as he wanted without his body betraying him. The realization hit him fresh, even though he'd known it intellectually, he was healed. The training had worked. She was crying. Trying to hide it, the way she always did, but he could feel the dampness against his shirt. Mei Ling. Don't say anything. Just, let me do this for a minute. He let her. Finally, she released him. Stepped back to look at him properly, her eyes red but her smile fierce and sharp, the smile he'd carried in his memory through 2 months of fire and stone. You look different. Different how? She circled him slowly, studying. The way Feng had studied him, but warmer. More personal. Her eyes traced his posture, his hands, and the way he held himself. You're standing differently. Straighter. Like you're not expecting something to hurt. Jon hadn't noticed, but she was right. The unconscious hunch he'd carried since Yunkai, the protective curl around his damaged ribs, was gone. He stood fully upright for the first time in years. The training worked. The first stage. There's more to do. But your hands, she grabbed his right hand, examining it with an intensity that made him want to laugh. The fingers. They're not shaking. No. She squeezed his hand. Hard. Harder than she ever had before, because before he couldn't take it. His fingers didn't cramp. Didn't seize. Just squeezed back. Jon. Her voice was wonder and relief and something that might have been tears again. It worked. It actually worked. They settled onto their bench, the same positions they'd sat in 100 times, but everything was different now. The late afternoon sun slanted through the leaves, dappling them in gold and shadow. Tell me everything. From the beginning. It's a lot. I have time. I've had nothing but time for 2 months. Jon talked. He told her about the first morning, the bell that woke him, the basin that waited, and the fire that seeped through his flesh to burn his bones from the inside. He told her about the exercises that seemed designed to break him, about holding positions until his muscles screamed and then holding longer. About the loneliness that was almost worse than the pain, the silence, the grey-robed monks who treated him like furniture, the long nights with no one to talk to except the jade wolf pendant against his chest. He told her about the 14th night. You almost left. I thought about it. I was lying on my mat, and I couldn't imagine surviving one more day. Every bone in my body was burning. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I just wanted it to stop. Mei Ling's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. What made you stay? Jon touched the jade wolf pendant through his shirt with his free hand. You. The swords you're keeping. The promise I made. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she leaned against him, the way she had on his last night, her head resting on his shoulder. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. I would have been furious if you'd quit. I know. I would have climbed the mountain and dragged you back. I know that too. Jon. What about you? Jon asked as the shadows lengthened around them. What happened while I was gone? Mei Ling deflected at first, nothing as interesting as bones on fire, but Jon pressed, and eventually she talked. She'd practiced sword work every day, like she promised. Sun Cao had helped, reluctantly at first, then with something like genuine investment. He actually taught you. Taught is a strong word. Criticized is more accurate. But he showed me what I was doing wrong, which is more than he's ever done before. She'd read every book in Xi's library about the internal arts, trying to understand what Jon was going through. Most of it was incomprehensible. Meridians and chi flows and bone marrow cultivation. I understood maybe 1 word in 10. She'd argued with her father twice about the war councils. He still didn't notice her. Maybe less than before. The political situation is getting worse. Father is gone for days at a time. When he's here, he's in meetings with generals and advisors. I don't think he's spoken more than 20 words to me since you left. And she'd visited the gate every day for the last 3 weeks, asking if there was any word from the mountain. Every day. I was bored. And worried. Mostly worried. About me. About whether you'd come back the same. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, not meeting his eyes. Feng's training changes people. Xi told me. Some students come down from that mountain entirely different. I was worried you'd be. I don't know. Not you anymore. Jon took her hand again and squeezed it gently. I'm still me. I know. I can tell. She paused, seeming to search for words. You're still you, but, more? Like someone turned up a flame that was too low before. Show me. Show you what? What you can do now. The training. I want to see. Jon stood. Considered. He hadn't tried any combat movements since completing the bone washing. Feng had warned him against using the breathing techniques. The foundation was laid, but the structure wasn't complete. But he could show her the basic changes. He moved through simple forms. No enhancement. No techniques. Just his body, moving the way bodies were supposed to move. Mei Ling watched with an intensity that made him feel both proud and self-conscious. The difference was subtle but profound. Jon moved with a groundedness he'd never had before. Each step was certain, rooted. Each position was stable in a way that suggested immovability. He wasn't faster than before, wasn't stronger in the obvious ways, but there was a solidity to him now, the same quality Mei Ling had noticed in the monks at the monastery. You move like them now. The Stone Tiger's students. A little. Only the first stage. I have a long way to go. But your hands do the forms. The ones from before. Jon hesitated. Then complied. He moved through a basic sword form empty-handed, without a weapon, but the positions were clear. The same form that had made his right hand cramp in the training yard. The same movements that had triggered his collapse, his flashback, and his public humiliation. No cramp. No pain. Just smooth, certain movement. Jon. Her voice was hushed. That's the form that broke you. In the training yard. I know. And now it's nothing. Not nothing. The foundation is laid. But I can't use the breathing techniques yet. Feng says that comes later. They sat again as the sun sank lower, the shadows growing longer across the garden. How long do you have? Before you go back? Jon had been waiting for this question. Dreading it. A week. Maybe 2. Feng wants me rested before the next stage. The next stage? How long is that one? 6 to 12 months. Marrow refinement. The weight of it settled between them. 6 to 12 months. More time apart than they'd spent together since he washed up on the beach. Mei Ling's expression didn't change, but Jon saw something flicker behind her eyes. The same pain he was feeling, carefully controlled. That's a long time. I know. You'll miss the autumn festival. The first snow. My birthday. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. This is what you need to do. Her voice was steady. Her hands, clasped in her lap, were not. Mei Ling. I said don't apologize. I mean it. She looked at him directly, her dark eyes fierce. I knew what I was agreeing to when I told you to go. I'm not going to complain now that it's real. Jon reached for her hand. She let him take it. When it's done, when all the stages are complete, I'm coming back. For good. No more mountains. No more training that takes me away for months. You don't know that. There might be more. Then I'll do it faster. Whatever it takes. But I'm coming back to you. Mei Ling was quiet for a long moment. The garden filled with evening sounds, birds settling in the trees, wind through leaves, distant voices from the fortress. You know what I've been thinking about? These 2 months. What? The twin swords. The ones I'm keeping for you. Jon's chest tightened at the mention. He hadn't let himself think about them much up on the mountain. They were too precious, too painful. What about them? When you gave them to me, you said, until I'm worthy of them. Like worthiness was something you had to earn. Something you had to suffer for. She turned to face him fully, her expression thoughtful. But I've been thinking, maybe that's wrong. Maybe worthiness isn't about how much you can endure. Maybe it's about something else. What? I don't know yet. But I'm going to figure it out. By the time you're done, by the time you come back for those swords, I'll have an answer. The sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the garden in shades of gold and crimson. 2 children sat on a worn wooden bench, hands intertwined, watching the light fade. They had a week. Maybe 2. Then separation again. But for now, for this moment, they were together. That had to be enough. Mei Ling. Word had spread by the time they emerged from the garden. The fortress hummed with whispered conversations, servants finding reasons to linger in hallways where Jon might pass. The foreign boy was back from the Stone Tiger's mountain. The white-haired one who had collapsed in the training yard, who had been called cursed and white devil by people who should have known better. He came back, Mei Ling could almost hear them thinking. He survived. In Yi, that meant something. Dinner was held in the smaller hall, the one reserved for family and close household members. General Kai was absent war councils, as always, but Master Ji was there, and Sun Cao, and a handful of household officers who had become familiar over the past year. Jon sat beside Mei Ling. His posture was different, she kept noticing it. The way he held himself. The way he moved. Small things that added up to something larger, something that made him seem more present, more solid. Master Ji studied Jon throughout the meal, saying little and watching a lot. His chopsticks moved mechanically, his attention clearly elsewhere. When their eyes met across the table, Ji nodded slowly, acknowledgement of something Mei Ling didn't fully understand. Sun Cao's reaction was more complex. The older boy had been different since the training yard, since he'd watched Jon collapse and then defended him against the servants' whispers. Something had shifted in him that day, some walls coming down or some doors opening. Now he watched Jon with an expression Mei Ling couldn't quite read. Wariness? Curiosity? Something like recognition? When Jon reached for a dish, Sun Cao's eyes tracked to his hand. Watching for the tremor. Finding none. Something shifted in Sun Cao's expression. He didn't speak, but Mei Ling saw it, the last vestiges of dismissal fading, replaced by genuine assessment. He's seeing Jon as a real threat now, she realized. Or a real equal. Maybe both. After dinner, Mei Ling found herself beside Master Ji, while Jon engaged in a conversation with one of the household officers. He's different. Yes. Is it, good different? Ji considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything, the same careful attention he gave to historical texts or strategic analyses. The bone-washing stage has succeeded. His skeleton has been rebuilt. The damage from his past has been cleansed. That's not what I'm asking. I know. Ji's eyes were kind beneath his scholarly composure. You're asking if he's still the boy you pulled from the beach. Is he? In the ways that matter, yes. In some other ways, no. Transformation changes everything, including the things we want to keep unchanged. Mei Ling felt a chill despite the warmth of the hall. But he came back, Ji continued. He could have become someone who isn't concerned about the things he cared about before. Some students do. The training burns away everything except the training. And Jon held on to something. Someone. Ji's gaze was familiar. The same someone who's been asking about him every day for weeks. Mei Ling felt her face warm. I wasn't. You were. It's not a criticism. It may have saved him. The household retired. Jon and Mei Ling walked together through the fortress, neither wanting to separate. The corridors were quiet now, lit by lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. I should sleep. Ji wants to examine me in the morning. I know. But I don't want to go. I know that too. They stopped outside Jon's old room, the same one he'd left 2 months ago, preserved exactly as it was. Someone had kept it clean, dusted the surfaces, and changed the bedding. Probably at Mei Ling's orders, though she wouldn't admit it. It feels strange. Being back here. Good strange or bad strange? Both. He looked at her, his grey eyes catching the lantern light. Everything's the same, but I'm different. It's like wearing clothes that don't quite fit anymore. You'll adjust. You have a week. Maybe 2. Don't push it. Take the 2 weeks if you can. They stood in the doorway, neither eager to say good night. It wasn't really goodbye, they'd see each other tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until he left. But this moment felt like an ending anyway. The first day of his return is complete. Thank you. For waiting. Where else would I be? The same words she'd said the morning he left. They meant more now. Jon reached out and touched her hand briefly. His fingers were warm and strong, no tremor, no weakness. Good night, Mei Ling. Good night, Jon. He disappeared into his room. The door closed quietly behind him. Mei Ling stood in the hallway for a long moment, her hand still warm where he'd touched it. 2 weeks, she thought. I'll make them count. Jon. The room was exactly as he'd left it. The bed. The desk. The window overlooking the garden. Even the scrolls on the shelf were in the same positions, as if time had stopped the moment he walked out the door 2 months ago. Someone had kept it clean, dusted the surfaces, changed the bedding, and swept the floor. Mei Ling's doing, or her orders. She wouldn't admit it, but Jon knew. He stood in the center of the room and let the familiarity wash over him. 2 months ago, I stood here afraid of what was coming. Now I'm afraid of what comes next. Alone, Jon allowed himself to really feel what had changed. He stretched his fingers, one by one. Full range of motion. No pain. The joints moved smoothly, responding to his will without protest or delay. He twisted his torso, the rotational movement that dual sword fighting required. Smooth. Easy. No grinding of damaged bone against damaged bone. He breathed deeper than he'd breathed in years. His ribs expanded fully. His lungs filled completely. The familiar catch, the limitation that had been with him since the storm, was gone. It worked. It actually worked. The relief was so intense it made his eyes sting. He'd known it intellectually and had felt the changes throughout the journey down the mountain. But here, in this room where he'd spent so many nights struggling to sleep through bone-deep pain, the reality hit him fresh. He wasn't broken anymore. Damaged, not crippled, Ji had said. There's a difference. Now, maybe, not even damaged. Jon moved to the window. The garden was dark now, lit only by lanterns along the paths. The bench where he'd sat with Mei Ling was a shadow among shadows. She waited for me. Every day. Asked about me every day. She's going to wait again. 6 to 12 months. How do I deserve that? The question had no answer. Maybe that wasn't the right question. How do I become someone who deserves that? Better. That was a question with an answer. By finishing what I started. By becoming strong enough to protect her. By coming back and staying. The bed was softer than the monastery mat. Almost uncomfortably so. Jon's body had grown used to stone floors and thin padding. He lay there staring at the ceiling, his mind running through the days ahead. Tomorrow, Ji's examination. Official confirmation of what Feng's training had accomplished. The day after, perhaps he'd see the twin swords. Perhaps he'd hold them again, just hold them, not use them. Feel their weight. Remember what he was working toward. The week to come, time with Mei Ling, time to remember what he was fighting for. And then, back to the mountain. 6 to 12 more months. Marrow refinement. One stage done. More to go. But I did it. The first part is finished. I can do the rest. Sleep came easier than it had in 2 months. The bed was soft, the room was warm, and somewhere in the fortress, a girl with dark hair was probably lying awake thinking about him. Jon smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, the next stage begins.